Chapter 1708. Bloodline Breakthrough. After the Yi clan's ancestor founded the clan, his bloodline was the strongest in the clan's history. No one could break through the bloodline shackles again. In the beginning, the bloodline led the Yi clan to prosperity and strength. However, gradually, as the Yi clan grew stronger, the bloodline became the shackles of the entire Yi clan. One of the main reasons why God Yi had so many people supporting him back then was because he was the most likely person in the Yi clan's history to change his bloodline. Once God Yi broke through the bloodline, he would bring the Yi clan to a higher level. However, God Yi was killed by Yi Lingtian before he could fully mature. Now, no one expected God Yi to break through the bloodline with just a simple gesture. What did that mean? It meant that he actually had the ability to break through the bloodline shackles back then. However, he did not choose to do so. God Yi looked at Yi Lingtian. I know you really want to be the family head, so I've been suppressing my bloodline back then. As he said that, he paused and said, "We're mother and son. Is there a difference between you being the family head and me being the family head?" "There is." Yi Lingtian suddenly laughed. "The difference is too big. Because your way of thinking is different from mine. Do you understand?" God Yi looked at Yi Lingtian for a long time, then nodded slightly. "I understand." His philosophy of managing the clan was indeed different from Yi Lingtian's. He was putting people and his family above everything else. What was Yi Lingtian thinking? He wanted to use the Yi clan's resources to help her reach a higher level. She prioritized herself. If God Yi became the family head, there would be conflict between mother and son. At that moment, God Yi suddenly said, "Guardian Yi Tian, can you make a decision now?" At the side, Yi Tian suddenly said, "Guards." As soon as his voice fell, hundreds of people suddenly appeared outside the ancestral shrine and surrounded it. At that moment, Yi Qian also suddenly said, "Guards." As soon as he said that, thousands of powerful auras suddenly rose from all around the Yi clan and surrounded the ancestral shrine. Obviously, both of the Yi clan had chosen to stand with God Yi. Bloodline breakthrough. That was related to the Yi clan's future. In the ancestral shrine, some Yi clan elders and experts also looked at God Yi. What did God Yi's bloodline breakthrough mean? It meant that it could change their fate. It also meant that God Yi had the chance to surpass his ancestors. Many elders began to stand on God Yi's side. In the hall, Yi Lingtian still had a faint smile on his face. It was very calm. Although the current situation was already somewhat disadvantageous to her. Who dares to go against the clan leader? At this time, an angry shout suddenly came from outside the hall. Everyone turned their heads to look outside the hall. Outside the hall, a middle-aged man led over 100 black-armored experts over. Yi Jun. The leader of the Yi clan's troops was the same as Yi Qian, leading the Yi clan's most elite experts. Yi Jun barged into the ancestral shrine and knelt on one knee before Yi Lingtian. "Clan leader, all of our clan soldiers will be here in half an hour. In addition, the 10 divine generals have also brought their men to the Yi clan. They will arrive in half an hour." Yi Lingtian smiled and said, "Get up." Yi Jun stood up and stood behind Yi Lingtian respectfully. Outside the ancestral shrine, more and more Yi clan experts arrived. Not only that, but more and more elders arrived as well. At this time, the Yi clan was ready to fight at any time. God Yi's side was still at a disadvantage. Because he only had the support of Yi Tian and Yi Qian, and Yi Lingtian still controlled the entire Yi clan. At this time, an old man suddenly walked into the hall. Seeing the newcomer, everyone was slightly stunned. Yi Lingtian also looked at the newcomer. Yi Qiu. The current Yi clan's supreme elder could be said to be the one who had lived the longest. Qingcheng, Yi clan, ancestral shrine. Ancestors above, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From this moment on, Yi Xian's position as crown prince shall be removed and Yi Lang shall succeed him. The one who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a young man with a faint smile on his face. That person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi clan's elders. Why? At this time, a somewhat timid voice suddenly rang out in the ancestral shrine. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. The little girl was about 12 or 13 years old. Her two little hands were tightly gripping the corners of her skirt. Her face was sickly pale and she looked a little weak. There was even a hint of fear in her eyes. The little girl's name was Yi Ling. She was Yi Xian's biological sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian, she rushed over despite her illness. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl named Yi Ling bowed slightly to the people in the ancestral shrine and said timidly, Grand Elder, my brother Yi Xian is a crown prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Grand Elder glanced coldly at Yi Ling. This is a family matter. Why are you interrupting? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid and did not dare to look at the Grand Elder. However, she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral shrine. Once again, she bowed to the elders and said, Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan for the mining rights. He is fighting for the clan with his life on the line. We don't know if he's dead or alive. Yet, the clan is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The Grand Elder suddenly raged, whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new crown prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed, you should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Grand Elder coldly replied, then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, two Yi clan's guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, this is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years. Even now, he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince, Yi Lang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered, young master Yi Lang inherits the title of crown prince. It's everyone's wish. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded. Yi Ling's right cheek instantly turned red and swollen. However, she didn't cry. She just held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled, what's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed, subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded, you're not bad. After I become the crown prince, I'll need 10 personal guards. You can be my personal guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He hurriedly bowed deeply, this subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded, drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Do not hold back. Understood? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang. When he saw the killing intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this time, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something and stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was dressed in a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from the Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. Within the ancestral hall, all the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes. His face was dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pang! Zhang Mu felt dizzy, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there. He charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you?" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's appearance, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced apart. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pang! Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the Yi clan elders. Why? Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Yi Xian was to be replaced, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to everyone in the hall, as she asked timidly, "Great Elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. "This is a matter of the clan, what are you interrupting for? Leave." Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, "Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. This is truly unfair. Impudent." The Great Elder suddenly raged, "Whether he's crippled or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this time, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. "He should be flogged 30 times, as a warning to others." The Great Elder replied coldly, "Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists, and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the position of prince. What are you yelling about?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap! A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. "Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince." Yi Lang nodded, "You're not bad. After I become the prince, I'll need 10 guards. From now on, you'll be my guard." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and quickly bowed deeply. "I'll go through fire and water for the prince, and I'll do anything for you." Yi Lang nodded, "Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Don't hold back, understand?" Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something, and he suddenly stopped. Inside the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside the hall. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, all the elders frowned. The great elder squinted his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang, and was about to speak. At this moment, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pang! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and he charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you!" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu, and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pang! Chapter 1709. Who used the Swordmaster token? When these words came out, the entire eternal world was shocked. Countless powerhouses looked towards the sky above Yi world. In the sky above Yi family's ancestral temple, there stood a swordsman in white. From the appearance, he was about 30 years old, dressed in snow-white clothes, with a ramrod-straight body, sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes, very handsome. In the man's right hand, he held a sword. The sword was 3 feet long and 2 fingers wide. On the tip of the sword, there was a sword light flickering. Below, in the Yi clan's ancestral temple, the smile on Yi Lingtian's face gradually disappeared. And the expressions of all the Yi clan powerhouses in the ancestral temple became solemn. What a powerful swordsman! Who the hell was it? At this time, Yi Lingtian suddenly stood up, looked at Yi Xian, and said with a smile, "I underestimated him." Yi Xian ignored Yi Lingtian. He looked up. "I used the Swordmaster token." Buzz! A ray of sword light suddenly landed in front of Yi Xian. The sword light dissipated. It was that man in white. When he saw Yi Xian, the man in white was slightly stunned. In the next moment, he carefully sized up Yi Xian, and then said, "You are..." Yi Xian immediately activated his mad demon bloodline. Seeing Yi Xian's bloodline power, the man in white was slightly stunned, and then said with a smile, "You are the young master." Young master. Hearing that, all the Yi clan powerhouses in the hall looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian cupped his fists. "Senior is?" The man in white smiled and said, "Ah sure. People from the Sword Alliance. Sword Alliance. Yi Xian smiled and said, Senior Usher, I'll have to trouble you this time. Usher turned around and glanced at everyone in the hall, and finally looked at Yi Lingtian. Yi Lingtian smiled and said, Usher. What an endless world swordsman. Endless world. Hearing that, everyone in the hall was shocked. Above the boundary realm, that was endless world. There were no more than 10 endless realms in the entire eternal world, and there was not a single swordsman. This random person who came was actually from the endless world? Ah Xiao looked at Yi Lingtian. Please enlighten me. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly drew his sword. Buzz! The cry of a sword soared into the sky. Not far away, the corner of Yi Lingtian's mouth curled up into a smile. The smile was a little cold. She did not retreat, but advanced instead. Boom! An expanse of light suddenly erupted from within the ancestral shrine. In an instant, the entire ancestral shrine was transformed into ash, and all the experts here retreated explosively. Suddenly, countless rays of light erupted. In an instant, the space in an area of over 10,000 kilometers was sliced into countless pieces. All the experts were horrified and retreated once more. Yi Xian also retreated rapidly. At this moment, he was extremely shocked. He didn't expect Ah Xiao to be so strong. He did not expect Yi Lingtian to be so terrifying. It was not an ordinary kind of horror. At that moment, Yi Lingtian, who was in the distance, suddenly turned into a shadow and disappeared. In an instant, the entire sky was filled with Yi Lingtian's shadow. Not far away, Ah Xiao's eyes slowly shut. He slowly raised the sword in his right hand, then shook it lightly. In an instant, tens of thousands of illusory energy swords appeared behind him. Ah Xiao took a step forward and swung his sword down. Chop! Chop! When his voice faded, the tens of thousands of energy swords behind Ah Xiao suddenly shot out explosively. Chi! 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 In an instant, the entire horizon started to crumble inch by inch. Countless sword lights shot out in all directions like fireworks. But right at this time, that Yi Lingtian suddenly appeared in front of Ah Xiao. Ah Xiao suddenly drew his sword and slashed. Yi Lingtian pointed a finger out. On the fingertip was a river of time. Rumble. The horizon instantly turned into a stretch of nothingness. The two people retreated explosively at the same time. But Yi Lingtian stopped after retreating several hundred feet. He looked into the distance. This chapter is not over, please flip the page. Ah Xiao, who was still retreating, took a step forward and flipped his right hand lightly. Spacetime reversal. His voice had just faded when a bizarre scene appeared. Only to see that Ah Xiao, who was originally retreating explosively, suddenly appear in front of Yi Lingtian bizarrely. Yi Lingtian pointed a finger at Ah Xiao's glabella. Right at this critical moment, the sword in Ah Xiao's scabbard suddenly unsheathed. Buzz! A sword hum suddenly resounded. At the same time, a sword stabbed directly on Yi Lingtian's fingertip. Rumble! The entire horizon trembled violently. Immediately after, Xiao retreated explosively several tens of thousands of feet away. After stopping, Xiao looked at Yi Lingtian in the distance. A hint of disdain surfaced at the corner of Yi Lingtian's mouth. Just this? Below, God Ye's voice suddenly sounded out in Yi Xian's mind. She already surpassed the endless world. No wonder Shao clan's patriarch and Hera clan's patriarch couldn't stop her. Surpassed the endless world. Yi Xian's face darkened. This woman actually surpassed the endless world and was even higher than Ah Xiao's realm. Not only was this woman ruthless, but she was also very fierce. In the horizon, Xiao suddenly walked slowly towards Yi Lingtian. One step, one sword seal. Rumble. A monstrous sword momentum swept towards Yi Lingtian like a flood. In an instant, the entire horizon immediately boiled up. Along with the appearance of this formidable sword aura, everyone in the surroundings felt a strand of invisible pressure descend upon them. Below, everyone looked towards Xiao in the horizon. Clearly, this Xiao was going to jump ranks to challenge. Opposite Xiao, Yi Lingtian flicked his sleeves and that powerful sword momentum released by Xiao was directly blocked. At this time, Xiao suddenly became illusory. Swish! A sword suddenly arrived in front of Yi Lingtian. This sword contained an extremely domineering sword aura. However, this sword directly pierced through thin air. The space where the sword tip landed was directly annihilated. Yi Lingtian vanished. In the field, everyone was somewhat dumbfounded. Yi Xian was also somewhat dumbfounded. Where did this woman go? At this time, God Ye's voice sounded out in Yi Xian's mind once more. Space-time dimension suppression. This swordsman friend of yours is in danger. Right then, Xiao's pupils suddenly constricted in the horizon. He turned around abruptly and swung his sword. Swish! As the sword slashed down, a sword gleam descended from the sky as if it was going to split heaven and earth. However, that sword still slashed through thin air. At this time, Xiao suddenly retreated frantically. In the process of retreating, the sword gleam around him dissipated bit by bit. Seeing that, Yi Xian's face darkened. At this time, God Ye's voice sounded in his mind again. It's already dimension suppression, At this time, Xiao suddenly opened his palm and a sword appeared in his hand. The next moment, he suddenly stabbed forward. Swish! Where the sword landed, the entire sky turned pitch black as if the sky was collapsing. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion suddenly sounded in the sky. At this time, a woman appeared in the field. It was Yi Lingtian. Yi Lingtian looked at Xiao in the distance with a calm expression. What a great move! Xiao put away his sword and looked at Yi Lingtian. Again. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly disappeared on the spot. Swish! A ray of sword gleam tore through the field. In the distance, Yi Lingtian's lips curled into a disdainful smile. She took a step forward and gently clenched her fist. Boom! That clench directly grabbed the tip of Xiao's sword. Boom! The dark matter space around the entire sky boiled and then was annihilated bit by bit. Only Yi Lingtian and Xiao were unharmed. Yi Lingtian looked at Xiao and sneered. Not bad indeed, but you're still lacking. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly twisted her right hand. This chapter is not over. Please continue to the next page. Boom! In an instant, Xiao was sent flying thousands of feet away. After stopping, Xiao stood with his sword in hand. Countless sword gleams crisscrossed around him. At this time, Yi Lingtian suddenly took a step forward. Nirvana time. As soon as he finished speaking, the dark space around Xiao in the distance disappeared bit by bit. Xiao frowned slightly and swung his sword gently. In an instant, countless sword auras gushed out of his body and formed shields around him. However, those sword auras were also disappearing bit by bit. Xiao's expression darkened when he saw that. At this moment, Yi Lingtian, who was in the sky, suddenly lowered his head to look at Yi Xian below. Smiling, he said, "Are you disappointed?" Yi Xian shook his head. "It's just a little unexpected." Yi Lingtian laughed. "I understand. You think you can kill me in a second by calling people over, right?" Yi Xian smiled sheepishly. "I did have that thought." Yi Lingtian smiled. "Unfortunately, it didn't happen as you wished." As she said that, she suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian and looked at Yi Xian. You can continue calling people over. Continue calling people over. Domineering. In the field, countless Yi clan powerhouses who supported Yi Lingtian immediately went into an uproar. Some Yi clan powerhouses even roared, "Call people over. Call people over." More and more Yi clan powerhouses roared in unison. "Call people over." Inside Yi Xian's body, Xiao Ta suddenly snickered. "Young lord, in the past, it was always you who let others call people over. Now, it's others calling people over. How does it feel?" Yi Xian's face was filled with black lines. "Xiao Ta, do you believe that I'll bring you along to self-destruct later?" Xiao Ta was speechless. At this time, Yi Lingtian smiled again and said, "I'm giving you a chance to call people over. You have to cherish it." Yi Xian was just about to speak when a sword cry suddenly sounded in the distant horizon. In the field, everyone turned around to look. In the horizon, an old man in linen clothes with a long sword on his back slowly walked over. Seeing this old man in linen clothes, everyone's expression became solemn. Endless border again. Another endless border swordsman came. The old man in linen clothes looked around. Who used the Swordmaster token? Who used the Swordmaster token? In the field, those Yi clan powerhouses looked at Yi Xian. Meanwhile, the old man in linen clothes also looked at Yi Xian. He took a step forward. With this step, he directly arrived in front of Yi Xian. He sized up Yi Xian. In the next moment, a trace of surprise flickered in his eyes. "You're the young lord?" "Young lord." Yi Xian immediately nodded. "Yes." The old man in linen clothes smiled and said, "I finally meet the young lord." Yi Lingtian suddenly smiled and said, "Two endless border swordsmen, huh?" Right at this moment, a series of sword cries suddenly resounded in the distant horizon. In the next moment, rays of sword light entered the eternal world. In an instant, over 60 swordsmen appeared in the sky above the Yi clan. Those who came were at least endless border. Seeing this scene, the faces of all the Yi clan powerhouses turned pale. The smile on Yi Lingtian's face also froze at this moment. However, it was not over yet. A rift suddenly split open in the distant horizon. In the next instant, an enormous black palace floated out. Immediately after, a woman in white slowly walked out. Rumble. Following the appearance of this woman in white, the entire heaven and earth directly became illusory. Surpassing endless border. This was a powerhouse above the endless border. And behind this woman in white, there were even 12 powerhouses wearing white armor. All of them were at least endless border. The woman in white glanced at the surroundings. Finally, her gaze landed on Yi Xian. After sizing up Yi Xian, she appeared in front of Yi Xian and bowed slightly. Heavenly Path Hall's white clothes greets young lord. Everyone in the field was petrified. End of this chapter. Chapter 17:10. Needless to say, everyone here was stunned at this moment. Who's this woman in white? What sort of power is the Heavenly Palace? Could there be a place that's even more powerful than the Eternal Dimension? Actually, even Yi Xian was stunned. The woman's aura wasn't inferior to Yi Lingtian at all, but she actually addressed him as young master. The Heavenly Palace. He'd heard from Kongmi that besides the Sword Alliance, his father also had the Heavenly Palace. He hadn't expected the Sword Alliance and Heavenly Palace to be so terrifying. Where did his father find these people? Meanwhile, a nearby swordsman suddenly smiled and said, "Little fellow, where's the Swordmaster?" Yi Xian looked at the swordsman. It was a middle-aged man who wore plain clothes and held a sheathed sword in his hand. The swordsman grinned when he saw Yi Xian look over. "Wu Jiang." Yi Xian bowed slightly. "Senior Wu Jiang, I don't know where my father is right now, and I can't contact him. A trace of disappointment flashed through the eyes of the swordsman. Obviously, they wanted to see the green-clothed man. Meanwhile, Wuxiang grinned and was about to speak when Bai Yi suddenly said, "Young master, are we going to annihilate the Yi clan?" Annihilate the Yi clan. As soon as these words were spoken, all the experts of the Yi clan were shocked. Before this, they thought that Yi Xian calling others was a joke, a huge joke. But now, they realized that the Yi clan was the real joke. They were frogs in a well. The facts proved that the Yi clan was frogs in a well. At that moment, Yi Lingtian suddenly laughed. Everyone looked at Yi Lingtian. As for the experts of the Yi clan, they surrounded Yi Lingtian, including Yi Tian and Yi Qian who'd supported God Yi. Before this, the conflict between Yi Xian and Yi Lingtian was a conflict within the clan. Yet now, Yi Xian called them outsiders, and that was something they couldn't tolerate. In their opinion, Yi Xian was a threat to the Yi clan. Annihilate the Yi clan? Yi Lingtian looked at Bai Yi and smiled. You? As soon as she finished speaking, she clenched her right fist. Rumble. In an instant, a monstrous force swept out from her body like a volcanic eruption. At this moment, the entire eternal world began to boil, and the time dimension of the entire eternal world began to distort bit by bit. It was the entire immortal realm. Everyone was shocked. On the other side, a trace of shock flashed across the eyes of the Shao clan's and Hela clan's leaders. The two of them arrived very early. They were naturally concerned about the affairs of the Yi clan. Meanwhile, the patriarch of Shao clan shook his head and sighed. This woman has actually attained the void realm. Nothingness. Above the endless world was the limitless world, which was also the limitless world of time, able to cross regions of space-time. Previously, Ashur had been suppressed by Yi Lingtian across spacetime. If it wasn't for Ashur's incredible strength, that move would have been enough to kill Ashur. But they did not think that this woman was not the endless world at all, but nothingness. What was nothingness? In other words, the nihility of time. This level and boundless realm was simply a world's difference. One had to know that the two of them were still just peak boundless realm right now. And only at this moment did they understand why Yi Lingtian shook them off so easily. Because the other party was a realm higher than the two of them. Thinking up to here, the two of them both smiled bitterly. This chapter is not over, please flip the page. This woman's strength greatly exceeded their expectations. In the distance, a hint of surprise flashed across the eyes of White Shirt and the rest too. They also did not expect that this Yi Lingtian actually reached this sort of level. Nothingness realm, this realm was not simple. By the side, Yi Xian took a glance at Yi Lingtian. Damn it, this woman was really not simple. Why was the enemy so fierce this time? Trump cards one after another. Furthermore, he was still not sure that this was this woman's final trump card. Because until now, this woman did not have a trace of panic. Too calm. Calm until it was somewhat abnormal. At this time, Yi Lingtian looked at that White Shirt and said with a smile, "Come." When her voice faded, she suddenly vanished on the spot. While at this time, White Shirt suddenly floated up. In an instant, the two people directly entered inside a streak of white light. As soon as they entered the streak of white light, the dimension of time in the surroundings actually gradually vanished. Wu Jiang frowned slightly when he saw this. This woman is really formidable. She actually utilized the time Dao to such an extent. Yi Xian asked, "Is that woman in white in danger?" Wu Jiang grinned, "She's not simple as well." Suddenly, the streak of white light suddenly became illusory, and then everyone gradually saw Yi Lingtian and White Shirt's figures within the illusory light. Both of them were extremely strange at this moment. Their current battle had exceeded the understanding of many. Meanwhile, Wu Jiang suddenly said, "Young master, did the Swordmaster say anything before he left?" All the swordsmen looked at Yi Xian when they heard this. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. He didn't say much. He just asked me to live well. Wu Jiang nodded lightly and didn't say anything else. Yi Xian suddenly asked, Senior Wu, where are all of you from? Wu Jiang smiled and said, we come from all over the universe. Yi Xian frowned slightly, all over the universe? Wu Jiang nodded. Yi Xian said solemnly, what I know now is the immortal realm, and the people in this place can live forever. Wu Jiang nodded slightly, the immortal qi in this place is indeed very special. To a certain extent, it can make people live forever. However, it's not true immortality. Yi Xian frowned slightly, what do you mean? Wu Jiang smiled and said, there are many old people here. Why are there old people? Naturally, it's because of aging. This immortal qi can increase their lifespan, but it can't stop them from aging. Simply put, the people here can live for a very long time, but they will still age. Of course, if there is no external interference, they can indeed live for a very long time with this immortal qi. As for immortality. Saying that, he shook his head slightly, living for a long time doesn't mean eternal life. Yi Xian nodded slightly, I think I understand. Saying that, he looked at Wu Jiang and said, Senior, can you tell me about this universe? Wu Jiang smiled and said, naturally. This universe is so big and endless, there is really no end. Saying that, he pointed to the distant starry sky, look at that starlight. Yi Xian looked at the starlight and asked, what's wrong? Wu Jiang whispered, the starlight you see is far away from us. Even at our speed, I'm afraid it will take decades to reach it. Yi Xian was silent. Wu Jiang said again, we all come from all over the universe. We met because of swordsmanship, and then under your father's organization, we established the Sword Alliance. Saying that, he smiled slightly, under his guidance, our swordsmanship has made a big breakthrough. Yi Xian, this chapter is not over, please turn the page. Somewhat curious, how did you meet him? Wu Jiang smiled and said, he looked for us. Yi Xian asked, challenge? Wu Jiang nodded, yes. Hearing this, Yi Xian understood. It was definitely Dad who went around looking for these swordsmen to challenge, and after winning, he pulled these people into his group. Meanwhile, Wu Jiang suddenly said, you can make a trip to the All-Heaven City. Yi Xian asked, the All-Heaven City? Wu Jiang nodded, yes. There are more experts there, the stage is wider, and there are many monstrous geniuses of the younger generation. It's suitable for young people. Yi Xian suddenly said, Senior, do you think it's suitable for me to go? I've just annihilated a god. God annihilation. Wu Jiang hesitated for a moment, and then said, then I'll go later. Yi Xian was speechless. Wu Jiang smiled and said, actually, it doesn't matter if you go now because the main hall of the Heavenly Palace is there, and they have great influence there. Besides that, there's also the Zen sect. This Zen sect isn't simple, and it's also a force under the Swordmaster. Most importantly, the Swordmaster is the deputy city lord there. Yi Xian blinked, deputy? Wu Jiang shook his head and smiled, that's because he didn't want to be the city lord. However, it's difficult to refuse such kindness, so he took it. In short, that place is very interesting. If you have the chance, you should go and play there. Yi Xian nodded, all right. Right at this moment, the white light in the distance suddenly exploded, and in the next moment, two figures floated out. It was Yi Lingtian and Bai Yi. There was blood at the corner of Bai Yi's mouth, but Yi Lingtian wasn't injured at all. Obviously, Yi Lingtian had won. Beside Yi Xian, Wu Jiang said softly, the Swordmaster often tells us that there's always someone better out there, and he wants us to always keep a low profile. It's true. Not to mention in the eternal world, this woman can be considered a figure even in the All-Heaven City. Yi Xian nodded slightly. Even though he didn't like Yi Lingtian, he had to admit that this woman was truly ferocious. Most importantly, this woman had been concealing her strength all this time. In the sky, Yi Lingtian slowly closed her eyes. At this moment, the time dimension of everyone here trembled. Bai Yi frowned slightly when she saw this, and she immediately said, "Protect the young master." As soon as she finished speaking, she pointed her finger at Yi Xian, and the space in front of Yi Xian froze. Meanwhile, Wu Jiang and the others stood in front of Yi Xian, and dozens of powerful sword auras enveloped the area where Yi Xian stood. In an instant, the area where Yi Xian stood returned to normal. Meanwhile, Yi Lingtian looked down at Yi Xian. She roared with laughter that was slightly ferocious, "My good son, so long as your mother doesn't want to die, who in this world can kill me? Who can? I'm invincible. Invincible." Her voice was like thunder that shook the sky. Because she controlled the dimensions of the world, her voice directly penetrated the dimensions of the world and permeated the boundless universe. At this moment, experts in countless places heard her words. Countless unknown experts looked in the direction of the eternal world, and their eyes were filled with shock. Who was it? How could it be so terrifying? In a distant unknown starry sky, a swordsman in a white robe suddenly stopped and turned to look into the depths of the starry sky. Who said invincible? As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly flew up on his sword and tore through the starry sky, disappearing into the distant end of the starry sky in the blink of an eye. P.S. Many readers read books and don't vote. Young man, you have no morals. End of this chapter. Chapter 1711. Invincible. Everlasting world, Leaf world. Everyone was looking at Yi Lingtian. At this moment, Yi Lingtian was indeed invincible. In the Yi clan, the experts were in an uproar again. Yi Lingtian represented the Yi clan. It had to be said that the appearance of the experts from the Sword Alliance made the hearts of the Yi clan sink to the bottom. The danger of extinction. At that moment, they felt the threat of extinction. Now, they saw hope again. In the battlefield, a supporter of Yi Lingtian suddenly shouted, "The patriarch is invincible. Invincible." Along with this shout, countless experts of the Yi clan roared in succession. Invincible. At this moment, the momentum of the entire Yi clan reached its peak. Next to Yi Xian, Asher looked at Wu Jiang, "Brother Wu, should we inform Sword Addict?" Wu Jiang said solemnly, "She's already on her way." Hearing this, Asher nodded slightly. Next to him, Bai Yi opened her palm, and a lotus suddenly floated up from her hand. When it floated into the air, the lotus suddenly bloomed, and then turned into a beam of white light that disappeared into the horizon. At this moment, Yi Lingtian suddenly laughed, "Call anyone you want, I'm invincible." Invincible? At this moment, a voice suddenly came from the side of the sky. Yi Lingtian suddenly turned his head to look, and in the distance, a swordsman in a cloud-white robe was slowly walking over. Seeing this swordsman, Yi Xian was stunned at first, and then they hurriedly went to greet him. He walked in front of the swordsman, smiled, and said, "Big brother, why are you here?" The swordsman smiled slightly, "I suddenly heard that someone is invincible, so I came." Yi Xian laughed, and then said, "Big brother, didn't you go to the alternate dimension? Why didn't I meet you in the alternate dimension?" The swordsman shook his head, "The people in that place are too weak. It's boring, so I'm leaving." Yi Xian, the swordsman turned to look at the nearby Yi Lingtian, "You're invincible?" Yi Lingtian looked at swordsman. At that moment, there was a hint of seriousness in her eyes for the first time. She was one of the strongest people in the world. Naturally, she could feel the power of swordsmen. Very powerful. Yi Lingtian clenched her fists tightly and the space around her suddenly trembled. The swordsman looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "We'll talk later. Let me make the first move." Yi Xian nodded. All right. As he spoke, he stepped aside. Swordsman looked at Yi Lingtian. After sizing him up, he smiled. Not bad. Not bad. Below, Yi Xian's expression turned cold. It had to be said that it was extremely rare for Big Brother to give such an evaluation. Yi Lingtian, on the other hand, looked as if she had been humiliated. Her expression gradually turned ferocious. Not bad? Not bad? Huh. The swordsman turned to look at Yi Xian. Did I say something wrong? Yi Xian thought about it and said, what she means is that she's not just not bad. She's very good. Very, very good. As she said earlier, she thinks she's invincible. Invincible. The swordsman hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. She's bragging. Yi Xian was speechless. At the side, Yi Lingtian suddenly laughed. What's the point of saying so much? Let's fight. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly became illusory. In an instant, all the time dimensions in the entire immortal world became illusory. Time nothingness. At that moment, the space leaves around swordsman disappeared bit by bit. This disappearance was not just a simple disappearance, it was also erasure. She wanted to directly erase swordsman through the time nothingness. It had to be said that this ability was very terrifying. If she had used this ability directly before, White Shirt would not be a match at all. As soon as Yi Lingtian executed this move, the expressions of all the experts in the surroundings became solemn. Meanwhile, the swordsman in front of Yi Xian suddenly took a step forward, and then he stabbed with his sword. It was a very ordinary strike. However, it was exactly this ordinary strike that caused Yi Lingtian's expression to instantly change drastically. The space in front of swordsman was directly torn apart by this strike. In the next moment, Yi Lingtian's entire body was blasted flying. At the instant that she was blasted flying, her body was gradually being obliterated bit by bit. After she retreated for almost 100 kilometers, only her soul remained. Defeated. All the experts of the Yi clan were petrified. Defeated? Just a single strike? Yi Xian glanced at the swordsman in front of him and sighed in his heart. Big Brother is still invincible. It should be said that Dad, Qing, and Big Brother are all invincible. He'd thought that Yi Lingtian might be able to threaten swordsman, but now it would seem like he'd been overthinking it. Big Brother is still invincible. Swordsman's strength shocked all the experts of the Sword Alliance. He's so terrifying. Yi Lingtian, who stood in the distance, was the most stunned. She gazed at her soul with slight disbelief. I was defeated with a single strike? In the distance, swordsman sheathed his sword, and then he turned to look at Yi Xian and smiled, I'm leaving. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Yi Xian was stunned, and then he hurriedly said, Big Brother, you're leaving just like that? The swordsman smiled, what's wrong? Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, Big Brother, I think we can catch up. The swordsman grinned, you're even more mischievous than your father. Yi Xian was speechless. Meanwhile, Yi Lingtian suddenly muttered, how could this be possible? How could this be possible? The swordsman turned to look at Yi Lingtian, and as he gazed at Yi Lingtian, who seemed to have lost his soul, he hesitated for a moment, and then he said, you're actually not that weak. Yi Lingtian's expression instantly became extremely unsightly when he heard this. Meanwhile, Yi Xian smiled and said, Big Brother, did you hold back just now? The swordsman nodded obediently. He had indeed held back. Normally, when he looked for someone to spar with, he would stop when the time was right, and he would never kill. Unless he encountered someone special. Yi Xian sighed softly. The swordsman looked at Yi Xian, what's wrong? Yi Xian smiled bitterly, I'm slightly ashamed. I've improved a lot recently, and I thought the gap between me and Big Brother had narrowed. But now it seems like the gap between us is still so huge. Sigh. The swordsman smiled, don't be discouraged. Actually, you're not that weak. Yi Xian was speechless. This big brother's words were really hurtful sometimes. At that moment, Yi Lingtian suddenly said from afar, "How should I address you, Your Excellency?" The swordsman glanced at Yi Lingtian, then looked at Yi Xian. "She wants to kill you?" Yi Xian nodded. The swordsman frowned slightly, then looked at Yi Lingtian. "Although this little brother of mine is a little slippery, he's not a bad person. I wonder why you're targeting him?" Yi Lingtian was silent. She did not expect the swordsman to stand up for Yi Xian. Seeing that Yi Lingtian did not speak, the swordsman suddenly took a step forward, and an invisible sword force enveloped Yi Lingtian. Yi Lingtian's expression changed drastically. She knew that if the swordsman struck again, she would definitely die. Yi Lingtian quickly said, "He's my son." Hearing that, the swordsman was slightly taken aback, then looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled and said, "They're indeed mother and son. But that was in a past life." As he spoke, he recounted the grudge between God Yi and Yi Lingtian. When Yi Xian finished, the swordsman glanced at Yi Lingtian, then the sword in his hand suddenly flew out. The sword went straight for Yi Lingtian. Yi Lingtian's expression changed drastically. She could not block that sword at all. She could only wait for death. Yi Lingtian's face was ashen. She never thought that she would be so powerless one day. In the face of this sword, she was powerless. Even if she was at her peak, she would not be able to block it, let alone now that she was only left with her soul. That was because that sword was filled with killing intent from the swordsman. Right then, a voice suddenly rang out, "Senior, please have mercy." As the voice faded, the swordsman's sword stopped half an inch away from Yi Lingtian's eyebrows. The swordsman turned his head to look at Yi Xian. The one who spoke just now was God Yi. At that moment, God Yi's voice suddenly rang out in Yi Xian's body. "Brother Yi, give me one last quarter of an hour. How about it?" Yi Xian was silent. God Yi said again, "Please." Yi Xian sighed in his heart. "Sure." With that, he slowly closed his eyes. Soon, God Yi's consciousness took control of the body. After God Yi took control of the body, he walked in front of Yi Lingtian. Yi Lingtian looked at God Yi. "You win." With that swordsman around, both Yi Xian and God Yi won. The Yi clan could not fight against that swordsman at all. In fact, even without swordsmen, the Yi clan would still lose. In a one-on-one fight, apart from swordsmen, no one else was a match for Yi Lingtian. However, the Sword Alliance was not alone. There were dozens of them. In fact, 10 swordsmen was enough to stop Yi Lingtian because those swordsmen's combat power was truly terrifying. Moreover, the Sword Alliance and Skyline Palace had experts rushing over. Of course, if it were not for Brother Yi Xian's arrival, Yi Lingtian would not have lost so easily. In the distance, God Yi looked at Yi Lingtian with a complicated look in his eyes. "Mother, it's all over." Yi Lingtian smiled. "It's all over. You're the winner now." God Yi suddenly knelt down slowly. Everyone in the field looked at God Yi, puzzled. Yi Lingtian frowned slightly too. God Yi kowtowed 3 times, then said, "The grace of nurturing is greater than being together, but, in this life, we're even." As he said that, he turned and walked in front of swordsman, bowing slightly. "Senior, please let her live." However, swordsman shook his head. "Ask my young friend." God Yi closed his eyes slowly. "Brother Yi, is that all right?" Yi Xian didn't speak. Obviously, he refused. God Yi smiled, "Brother Yi, I've been cultivating all my life. In terms of natural talent, there are very few in the world who are stronger than me." As he spoke, he slowly clenched his right fist. Rumble. In an instant, a powerful aura suddenly swept out from within Yi Xian. The aura grew stronger and stronger, and it arrived at the Void Realm in the blink of an eye. The Void Realm. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned when they witnessed this scene, including Yi Lingtian. She hadn't expected God Yi to have actually reached the Void Realm. However, that wasn't the end. Yi Lingtian's aura was still rising madly. As it did, countless experts in the surroundings were shaken to the point of retreating repeatedly, and that included the experts of the Sword Alliance. In the blink of an eye, everyone had retreated hundreds of kilometers away. However, God Ye's aura was still rising madly. It didn't take long for his aura to far exceed the Void Realm. Everyone here was petrified. Only Swordsman's expression remained calm. However, a trace of surprise flashed through his eyes. At that moment, God Yi suddenly turned around to look at Yi Lingtian and grinned. "If I didn't want to lose, it would have been impossible for you to win all those years ago, mother." As he spoke, he opened his palm. There was a little wooden figurine in his palm. The little wooden figurine had the appearance of a little boy. Obviously, it was God Yi when he was young. God Yi looked at Yi Lingtian, and tears suddenly flowed from his eyes. He spoke softly, "How I wish for my life to be ordinary. Because then, you wouldn't want me to die." As soon as he finished speaking, his body started burning. It wasn't Yi Xian's body that was burning, but God Ye's consciousness. Moreover, everything he had learned in the past was being gifted to Yi Xian bit by bit. Obviously, that was his condition in exchange for saving Yi Lingtian. Chapter 17:12. One body, two consciousnesses. In truth, Yi Xian's body could also be said to belong to God Yi. After God Yi reincarnated, he became Yi Xian. However, his consciousness had always been suppressed by Tian Ming. At that moment, God Yi chose to make himself disappear completely and gave everything he had learned to Yi Xian, including his cultivation base. The reason he did that was to make Yi Xian let him go. An exchange. That was God Ye's exchange. Everyone in the field was looking at God Yi. Everyone could feel that God Yi was disappearing. His consciousness was disappearing. Once his consciousness disappeared, he would completely disappear from this world. All the Yi clan experts in the field had extremely complicated expressions. God Yi. He was the most monstrous person in the history of the Yi clan. He had surpassed the Void Realm. He had reached the height of the Yi clan's ancestors. Moreover, the most important point was that God Ye's consciousness had been suppressed for countless years. If he had not been suppressed for so many years and possessed his own body, how terrifying would he be? Everyone in the field turned to look at Yi Lingtian. At that moment, Yi Lingtian was also looking at God Yi. To be precise, he was looking at the little wooden figure in God Ye's hand. At that moment, her thoughts were pulled back to countless years ago. Early in the morning, a little boy sat on the stone steps at the entrance of a large hall. He rested his chin on his hands and looked into the distance. The little boy sat from morning to noon, then from noon to night, then from night to midnight. A bright moon hung in the starry sky. The little boy sat on the stone steps. He just waited. Gradually, he could not bear it any longer and fell asleep. Finally, just as the sky was about to brighten, a woman suddenly walked over from afar. The woman wore a plain robe. The robe was torn and stained with blood. It was obvious that she had just fought a great battle. The woman walked up to the little boy and gently picked him up. At that moment, the little boy suddenly looked up at the woman. When he saw her, he was stunned at first, then he hugged her. "Mother." The woman smiled, put the little boy down, and sat on the stone steps with him. The woman took the little boy's hand and smiled. "You've been waiting for me?" The little boy nodded. The woman gently rubbed the little boy's head, and then she said with a smile, "Mother has a present for you." As she spoke, she opened her palm, and within it was a small wooden figure. And the little wooden doll looked exactly like the little boy. Receiving the wooden figurine, the little boy was clearly overjoyed, and he caressed it repeatedly. The woman suddenly smiled and said, "How was Shen-er's cultivation today?" The boy quickly replied, "I've reached peri-celestial realm. The worldly realm." The woman was slightly stunned. She sized up the little boy and a trace of surprise flashed in her eyes. The little boy looked at the woman with anticipation in his eyes. Obviously, he wanted to praise him. The woman laughed and gently rubbed the little boy's head. "Amazing! My Shen-er is so powerful." Hearing this, the little boy immediately grinned and hugged the woman. The woman smiled and stood up. She pulled the little boy and walked into the distance. The little boy asked softly, "Is mother injured?" The woman nodded. The little boy held the woman's hand tightly. "When I grow up, I'll protect my mother," the woman smiled. But the little boy's eyes gradually became determined. Yi whirled. The wooden figurine in God Ye's hand suddenly fell. At that moment, Yi Lingtian also came to his senses. The moment he saw the wooden figurine fall, Yi Lingtian's soul suddenly trembled and his eyes were filled with fear. God Yi was gone. God Yi was gone. He was completely gone. This time, he really disappeared. There would be no more. There would not even be a reincarnation. In other words, he had completely become Yi Xian. He gave everything to Yi Xian. At that moment, Yi Xian opened his eyes. With a gentle wave of his right hand, the space in the field shook violently. His current realm was the previous realm of God Yi. Apart from his consciousness, God Yi gave everything he had to Yi Xian. The biggest winner. In the field, all the Yi clan powerhouses looked gloomy. The strongest and most monstrous genius in the history of the Yi clan was gone just like that. Gone just like that. All the Yi clan members felt their hearts bleed. That was a genius who could surpass their ancestors. Yet he died just like that in a family infighting. A wave of sadness surged in everyone's hearts. Yi Lingtian slowly walked in front of Yi Xian and picked up the wooden figurine. Looking at the wooden figurine in her hand, she seemed to have lost her soul. Yi Xian looked at Yi Lingtian. "You won. You finally won. He'll never come back." With that, he turned and left. Behind him, Yi Lingtian held the wooden figurine tightly in her hand, her eyes gradually lost focus. In a certain part of the starry sky, the woman in the plain dress withdrew her gaze, turned around, and continued moving forward. In the starry sky, Yi Xian and swordsmen walked slowly. Behind Yi Xian were a group of Sword Alliance powerhouses, Bai Yi, and the others. Swordsmen glanced at Yi Xian. Yi Xian's aura was very abnormal at that moment because his aura was getting stronger and stronger. Apart from swordsmen, no one else dared to approach him. Swordsman gently patted Yi Xian's shoulder. Boom! The powerful aura in Yi Xian's body suddenly calmed down. Yi Xian took a deep breath and suddenly felt much better. Swordsman said, "He gave it to you. You need to find a way to absorb it completely." Yi Xian nodded. "I know." Previously, God Yi gave him all his cultivation base, which was naturally a great thing for him. However, he needed to slowly absorb it and adapt to his current realm. As if thinking of something, Yi Xian turned to look at Bai Yi beside him. "Miss Bai Yi, what's the realm above the void realm?" Bai Yi said in a deep voice, "Ascend to heaven." Yi Xian was stunned, then said, "Ascend to heaven?" Bai Yi nodded and glanced at Yi Xian with a complicated expression. "Even in the All-Heaven City, there are only a few people at this realm." As she said that, she shook her head. "That God Yi is indeed extraordinary." God Yi. Yi Xian turned to look at Swordsman. Big brother, what do you think of God Yi? Swordsman said, he's still a little weak. Everyone was speechless. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. It seemed that apart from his father and Qing, it was difficult to find anyone in this world that could make this big brother take them seriously. Swordsman suddenly stopped and said with a smile, "It's time to part ways." Yi Xian hurriedly asked, "Where are you going, big brother?" Swordsman said with a smile, "I'm going to find someone who can kill me." Yi Xian was speechless. On the side, Sword Alliance, Bai Yi, and the others all had strange expressions. Swordsman glanced at Yi Xian and said with a smile, "Little guy, you're actually the most promising one." "You," at that point, he did not continue. Yi Xian hurriedly asked, "Big brother, what do you mean by that?" Swordsman said with a smile, "We'll wait for you." Having said that, he turned into a sword light and disappeared into the end of the starry sky. Yi Xian was a little confused. He left just like that? He left without finishing his sentence. Yi Xian was speechless. At that moment, Bai Yi suddenly said, "Young master, is there anything else you need us to do?" Yi Xian retracted his thoughts. After a moment of silence, he said, "Yes." Bai Yi bowed slightly. "Please instruct us, young master." Yi Xian smiled. "There's no rush for now. I need to adapt to my current realm first." Bai Yi nodded. "We'll protect you, young master." Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground and slowly closed his eyes. He needed to adapt to his current realm as soon as possible. After all, his current cultivation level was given to him by God Yi and not cultivated by himself. That was a difference. Fortunately, apart from God Yi's own consciousness, everything else had been gifted to him. To a certain extent, he had everything that God Yi once had. However, he was still Yi Xian and God Yi had completely disappeared. Because of that, he just needed to absorb and adapt. In short, he made a killing this time. In the battle between mother and son, Yi Xian benefited. A month later. In the starry sky, Yi Xian stood up and glanced at his body. At that moment, he had undergone earth-shattering changes. Ascension Heaven. At that time, Yi Xian also felt like he was dreaming. He had reached Ascension Heaven all of a sudden. That was too exciting. At that moment, Xiao Ta in Yi Xian's body suddenly said, "Sigh. Young master, I'm even more certain now." Yi Xian was a little curious. "What are you certain about?" Xiao Ta said in a deep voice, "I'm certain that you have the protagonist's halo, young master." Yi Xian was speechless. Xiao Ta said again, "After you came to the Yi clan, you did almost nothing, and then you directly reached Ascension Heaven. You're a bit too much." Yi Xian's face darkened at once. At that moment, Bai Yi suddenly said, "Congratulations, young master." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. "I'm afraid it's not a good thing to get it too easily." Hearing that, Bai Yi's eyes suddenly flashed a trace of surprise. In fact, she also wanted to remind Yi Xian, but she did not say it. She did not expect that Yi Xian would realize it himself. Yi Xian could be said to have really reached heaven in a single bound, and this was not necessarily a good thing. Because it was too easy. At that moment, Wu Jiang suddenly smiled and said, "Since young master can realize it, then the problem is not particularly big." Yi Xian said with a smile, "Let's not worry about it for now. Everyone, I may still need your help with something. I wonder if it's convenient for you?" Wu Jiang said with a smile, "Young master, please instruct us." Bai Yi also said, "Young master, please instruct us." Yi Xian looked up into the distance and whispered, "I have to change something." Yi clan. Somewhere on the stone steps, Yi Lingtian sat quietly. At that moment, she had restored her physical body. She just sat there, and in her hand was the little wooden man left behind by God Yi. Yi Lingtian looked into the distance, and gradually, her hair began to turn white bit by bit. After a while, her black hair turned snow white. P.S. Sorry, this time I'm not being ethical. Chapter 1713. The Desolate World. Yi Xian arrived at the desolate world by himself, and an old man appeared in front of him as soon as he arrived. It was the desolate clan's patriarch, Xiaotian. Xiaotian roared with laughter when he saw Yi Xian. Congratulations, young brother Yi. Yi Xian cupped his fists. Thank you for your help just now, Senior Xiaotian. Xiaotian shook his head. Don't mention it. To be frank, I was helping the desolate clan. Yi Xian smiled. No matter what, I'll remember this favor. Xiaotian roared with laughter. May I know what you intend to do next? He was testing Chen Shi. Actually, he was quite afraid that Yi Xian would enter the eternal dimension as well. If Yi Xian were to enter the eternal dimension, then he had no doubt that the power structure throughout the eternal dimension would undergo a tremendous change. It would threaten the desolate clan's status as well. Of course, if Yi Xian really wanted to enter the eternal dimension, then the desolate clan would have no choice but to form a good relationship with Yi Xian. After all, the forces standing behind Yi Xian were too terrifying. Not to mention the formidable middle-aged swordsmen, just the experts of the Sword Alliance standing behind Yi Xian were sufficient to sweep through the eternal dimension. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, I won't enter the eternal dimension. Xiaotian was slightly stunned, and then he was delighted in his heart. However, his expression remained calm. Young brother, the eternal dimension has eternal energy. Aren't you tempted by it? Yi Xian smiled. I don't need eternal energy right now. Xiaotian's expression instantly changed when he heard this. He'd almost forgotten Yi Xian's current realm of cultivation. After all, that fellow had surpassed the void rank. He had surpassed the void rank. Xiaotian shook his head and laughed bitterly when he thought up to this point. That little fellow hadn't done anything at all, yet he'd directly attained the void rank. Comparing oneself to others is truly infuriating. As if he'd thought of something, Xiaotian suddenly asked, Young brother, do you remember that halo you spoke of earlier? Yi Xian nodded. Of course. Why? Xiaotian looks at Yi Xian. I believe little friend's words now. Little friend, you must have some kind of halo. Yi Xian was speechless. Xiaotian laughed loudly. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled, and then he said, Senior Xiaotian, to tell you the truth, I came here this time to ask for your help. Xiaotian smiled and said, Little friend, speak. Yi Xian said, It's like this, I have some friends, they may need some immortal qi to cultivate. Xiaotian smiled and said, It's a very simple matter. Little friend, don't worry, our Xiao clan will take good care of your friend in the immortal world. To the Xiao clan, they could befriend Yi Xian by providing some qi of eternal life. This was definitely a great deal. After all, not to mention the power behind Yi Xian, even Yi Xian himself was a top-notch expert. The realm above the void rank. Xiaotian had a slightly complicated feeling in his heart when he thought up to this point. Actually, Yi Xian was sufficient to sweep through the entire immortal world on his own. Moreover, Yi Xian was just a minor figure before this. Yi Xian cupped his fists once more. Thank you. Xiaotian smiled and said, Little friend, how do you intend to deal with the Yi clan? The Yi clan. Even though the Yi clan had lost. However, that woman from the Yi clan hadn't died. Moreover, she could be considered as the #1 expert in immortal world. Once Yi Xian and the others left, then the Yi clan would become the greatest threat to the Xiao clan. Actually, he hoped that Yi Xian would kill Yi Lingtian. Yi Xian fell silent when he heard Xiaotian. He naturally understood what Xiaotian meant. Actually, he wanted to kill Yi Lingtian as well to put an end to all future troubles. Green City, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors above, Yi Xian has no talent and no virtue. From this moment onwards, Yi Xian's position as crown prince shall be removed and Yi Lang shall succeed him. The one who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a young man with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi clan's elders. Why? At this moment, a timid voice suddenly resounded in the ancestral hall. Everyone looked over and saw a little girl standing at the door. The little girl was about 12 or 13 years old. Her two little hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face was sickly pale and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of timidity in her eyes. The little girl was called Yi Ling. She was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian, she rushed over despite her illness. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is a crown prince. Why did you remove him for no reason? The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. This is a matter of the clan. What are you interrupting? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid and did not dare to look at the Great Elder directly. However, she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed again to the elders on both sides. Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan for the mining rights at Nanshan. He is fighting for the clan and his life is uncertain. Yet, the clan is using a groundless excuse to remove his position as crown prince. This is unfair. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged. It's not up to a little girl like you to decide whether to remove him or not. Men, drag her away. At this moment, the new crown prince, Yi Lang, suddenly smiled and said, he should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder said coldly, then flog him 30 times. Soon, 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, this is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years. Even now, he is risking his life for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to show off. The guard sneered, young master Yi Lang inherits the title of crown prince. What are you yelling about? With that, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded. Yi Ling's right cheek instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry. She just covered her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled, what's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed, I'm Zhang Mu. Greetings, Crown Prince. Yi Lang nodded, you're not bad. After I become the Crown Prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He hurriedly bowed deeply, I'm willing to go through fire and water for the Crown Prince. Yi Lang nodded slightly, drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't show any mercy. Do you understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking toward the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe. The robe was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from the South Mountain. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. Inside the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes, his face dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian was like a ferocious tiger leaping in front of him. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pang! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. However, Yi Ling did not stop there. He charged at Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian looked up at him and said, Your man. As he spoke, he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu. As he walked up to Yi Ling, seeing Yi Ling's appearance, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being cut by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed out, Brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pang! Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? At this time, a timid voice rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Yi Xian was to be replaced, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned, Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall, and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is a prince, why did you discard him for no reason? The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly, This is a matter of the clan, what are you interrupting? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid, and did not dare to look at the Great Elder, but she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and entered the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides, Elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan. He is fighting for the clan, and we don't know if he's dead or alive. Yet, the clan is using a groundless excuse to discard his position. This is unfair. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged, whether he discards his position or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed, You should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder replied coldly, Then flog her 30 times. Soon, 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists, and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he is fighting for the clan. The clan is so unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered, Young Master Yi Lang inherits the prince's position, and it's everyone's wish. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard, and smiled, What's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed, Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince. Yi Lang nodded, You're not bad. After I become the prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and hurriedly bowed deeply. This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the prince, even if it means death. Yi Lang nodded slightly. Drag him out. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall, don't show mercy, understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something, and suddenly stopped. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe, and the robe was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a sinister smile. Inside the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes, and his face darkened. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yi Lang, and just as he was about to speak, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. However, Yi Ling did not stop there, and charged towards Zhang Mu once more. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian looked up at him, and snarled, your man. As he spoke, he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed out, brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu, and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 17:14. At that moment, Dao Yi had mixed feelings. As she said, she still hoped that God Yi could win. However, the woman in the plain dress was too terrifying. Even if God Yi had reached the ascension stage, he still could not do anything to the woman in the plain dress. He had no choice but to die. The woman in the plain dress. That woman had suppressed God Yi from the beginning to the end. The reason why she did not kill him was probably because she wanted Yi Xian to absorb God Yi. From that point of view, God Yi was actually very tragic. First, he had such a mother, then he met the invincible woman in the plain dress. His life was a tragedy from the beginning to the end. In front of Dao Yi, Yi Xian did not speak. Previously, he could still say that he was God Yi and God Yi was him, but now, he was Yi Xian and God Yi was no longer there. That was because God Yi's consciousness had completely disappeared. Ah Ming and the others in the field also had mixed feelings. At that moment, they did not know how to face Yi Xian. Kill Yi Xian? That was obviously impossible. Besides, after spending so much time with Yi Xian, they had developed feelings for each other. At that moment, Dao Yi suddenly smiled and said, live well. Yi Xian smiled and said, you guys too. We'll meet again someday. With that, he turned around and left. Soon, Yi Xian disappeared from the women's eyes. Ah Ming suddenly said softly, he's the biggest winner. Dao Yi shook her head. He's also innocent. Everyone said that God Yi was a tragedy, but who would have thought about Yi Xian? From the beginning to the end, he did not do anything and was forcibly reincarnated by God Yi. Moreover, it brought him so much karma, especially the disaster karma in the early stages, which made him miserable. If it were not for the woman in the plain dress, Yi Xian would have been wiped out by God Yi. At that time, who would pity Yi Xian? It was also for that reason that Yi Xian never sympathized with God Yi. Because he had no right to sympathize with God Yi. If it weren't for Qing Er, Yi Xian would have disappeared long ago. The law of life suddenly said softly, "What do we do now?" Dao Yi glanced at the surroundings and said, "He has already greeted the Shao clan and Hera clan here. All of you can cultivate properly here." Ah Ming looked at Dao Yi. "What about you?" Dao Yi chuckled and said, "I want to look around." After saying that, she walked into the distance. Soon, she disappeared into the distance. Yi Xian didn't go directly to the All-Heavens city. Instead, he returned to the Azure Prefecture with Tuoba Yen. Initially, he wanted to bring Tuoba Yen, Mo Yinqi, and the others to the Eternal World so that they could use the Eternal Qi to cultivate. However, be it Tuoba Yen or Mo Yinqi, none of them were willing to go to the Eternal World. That place was too foreign to them. Yi Xian didn't force it. Fortunately, with the Shao clan and Hera clan taking care of them, Tuoba Yen and the others didn't lack the Eternal Qi. In front of a large hall, Yi Xian and Tuoba Yen sat on the stone steps. Tuoba Yen leaned on Yi Xian's shoulder, and the two just sat there. In the distant horizon, the moon was like a fire. After a while, Yi Xian said softly, "Are you really not going with me?" Tuoba Yen shook his head and smiled. Yi Xian turned to look at Tuoba Yen. "Why?" Tuoba Yen said softly, "If I go with you, I'll only become a vase because I can't catch up to your footsteps no matter what." Yi Xian didn't say anything. Until now, not many people could catch up to his footsteps. Especially now that he had reached the Heaven Ascension realm, Tuoba Yen suddenly grabbed Yi Xian's hand and looked at the distant horizon. "Remember, no matter how far you go, this Azure Prefecture is still your home." Azure Prefecture. Yi Xian looked into the distance and said with a smile, "Of course. Because you're here." Hearing this, a bright smile appeared on Tuoba Yan's face. Yi Xian suddenly said, "It's getting late. Why don't we go to bed?" Azure City, Yi Clan, Ancestral Shrine. Ancestors above, Yi Xian has no talent and no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as Crown Prince shall be removed and Yi Lang shall succeed him. The speaker was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a youth with a faint smile on his lips. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi clan's elders. "Why?" At this moment, a timid voice suddenly sounded in the ancestral shrine. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian, she rushed over despite her illness. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The little girl called Yi Ling bowed slightly to the people in the ancestral shrine and said timidly, "First Elder, my brother Yi Xian is a crown prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The first elder looked coldly at Yi Ling. "This is a matter of the clan. Why are you interrupting? Leave." Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the great elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, "Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. Impudent. The first elder suddenly raged, whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new crown prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed, you should be flogged 30 times as a warning. The first elder coldly replied, then flog 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi clan's guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, this is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years. Even now, he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, young master Yi Lang inherits the crown prince position. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded. Yi Ling's right cheek instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry. She just covered her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled, what's your name? The guard quickly bowed, subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded, you're not bad. After I become the crown prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He quickly bowed deeply, subordinate will go through fire and water for the crown prince. I'm willing to risk my life for you. Yi Lang nodded, drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't hold back. Understood? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. Inside the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside the hall. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe. The robe was tattered and covered in blood. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes. His face was dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this moment, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pang! Zhang Mu felt dizzy, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there. He charged at Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, your man? As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian ignored Zhang Mu, walking up to Yi Ling. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced apart. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed, brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pang! Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the Yi clan elders. Why? At this time, a timid voice rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to everyone in the ancestral hall, and asked timidly, "Great Elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. "This is a matter of the clan, what are you interrupting for? Leave." Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, "Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. Impudent." The Great Elder suddenly raged. "Whether he's crippled or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this time, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. "He should be flogged 30 times, as a warning to others." The Great Elder replied coldly, "Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, two Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists, and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the prince's position. What are you yelling about?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard, and smiled. "What's your name?" The guard quickly bowed. "This subordinate, Zhang Mu, greets the prince." Yi Lang nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the prince, I'll need 10 guards. From now on, you'll be my guard." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and quickly bowed deeply. "This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the prince, even if it means death." Yi Lang nodded. "Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Don't hold back, understand?" Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something, and he suddenly stopped. Inside the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside the hall. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe, and the robe was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang, and was about to speak. At this moment, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Bang! Zhang Mu's head spun, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you!" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu, and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pang! Chapter 17-15. Yi Xian's expression was calm as he watched the blood-red chain coming at him. He did not make a move because White Shirt was already in front of him. White Shirt's jade-like hand gently pressed forward. Boom! A long river of time dimension stretched in front of her. Boom! The chain was blocked, but the next moment, White Shirt's expression changed drastically because the time dimension in front of her turned into nothingness. The blood-red chain pierced straight through and slashed at Bai Yi. White Shirt's eyes narrowed slightly. She was about to make another move when more than a dozen sword flashes suddenly slashed the blood-red chain. Boom! The blood-red chain was forced to stop once again. At that moment, countless sword flashes formed a barrier in front of Yi Xian. Just as the swordsmen were about to make another move, the chain suddenly disappeared. Everyone looked into the distance and saw a black-robed woman standing in the previously formed spatial passage. And in her palm was the blood-red chain from before. White Shirt looked at the black-robed woman. "Who are you?" In fact, White Shirt was very shocked at that moment. There were not many people in this world who dared to go against the Sky Palace and the Sword Alliance. In the distance, the black-robed woman looked at Yi Xian and the corner of her mouth curled up slightly. "That's it?" Yi Xian looked at the black-robed woman. "My biggest enemy was the Yi clan, Yi Ling Tian. However, it's obvious that you're not one of them." The black-robed woman smiled. "Why don't you take a guess, young Master Yi?" Yi Xian looked at the black-robed woman. "God Ye's father, you're from God Ye's father's side." Hearing that, the black-robed woman's smile froze. Seeing that, Yi Xian slapped his forehead. "Oh my god, are you guys done? My F***king mind is going to explode." At first, it was the prophet, then it was God Yi, and now there was a new cause and effect. He was really going crazy. There was really no end to it. How could he live like this? He was really a little tired. If this went on, there would be no end. It was not only God Ye's current life, but God Yi also had his previous life had his previous life. Thinking of this, Yi Xian felt like he was going crazy. Yi Xian took a deep breath, then looked at the black-robed woman. "This girl, I really think that the grudge between me and God Yi can end here. Whatever his background, whatever his past life, it has nothing to do with me anymore. Let's call it a day. You go on with your lives, and I'll go on with mine, okay? I'm begging you. Please let me go. I really don't want to continue playing with you like this." The black-robed woman looked at Yi Xian. "In your dreams." Yi Xian was speechless. At this moment, Bai Yi suddenly said, "Young master, there's no need to talk to her. If they want to play, then we'll play with them." Wu Jiang also laughed and said, "Yes, my Sword Alliance is also willing to play with them." The black-robed woman glanced at Bai Yi and the others and sneered, "Do you really think that your Sword Union and Skypath Palace are invincible?" As she spoke, her body gradually became illusory. Bai Yi suddenly said, "Send an order back to Skypath Palace. Immediately ask the Palace Master to send reinforcements. Also, ask the Palace Master to send someone to investigate the woman just now." Behind Bai Yi, a powerhouse nodded slightly and left quietly. On the side, Wuxiang also said in a deep voice, "Contact Senior Sword Maniac immediately." Behind him, a swordsman powerhouse immediately released a sword aura. Whether it was Bai Yi or Wuxiang, their expressions were somewhat serious. The other party still dared to target Yi Xian despite knowing the strength of Sword Union and Skypath Palace. That meant that the other party was not afraid of Skypath Palace and Sword Union at all. Of course, they were not afraid, but they had to be cautious. That was because Yi Xian was here. If something happened to Yi Xian, how could they explain it to the Swordmaster? At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly turned around and left. Bai Yi and the others were stunned for a moment, then quickly followed. Yi Xian arrived at the Yi clan. Seeing that Yi Xian had come again with Bai Yi and the others, all the powerhouses in the Yi clan acted as if they were facing a great enemy. Yi Xian ignored the crowd and went directly to a large hall. In front of the hall, he saw Yi Lingtian. At this moment, Yi Lingtian's black hair had turned snow white. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lingtian's expression was calm. Yi Buyu did not speak. Yi Xian walked in front of Yi Lingtian. "Who is his father?" Yi Lingtian looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, "He's here to look for you." Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. "You're the one who informed his father." Yi Lingtian's smile became brighter. "Yes." Yi Xian stared at Yi Lingtian. "You want his father to kill me?" Yi Lingtian shook her head. Yi Xian frowned slightly. "Then what's your purpose?" Yi Lingtian walked in front of Yi Xian and looked straight at Yi Xian. "I want you to kill his father." Yi Xian was speechless. Yi Lingtian laughed maniacally. "Surprised?" Yi Xian nodded slightly. "Very surprised indeed." Yi Lingtian turned and looked up at the sky. She still had a bright smile on her face. However, this smile was a little crazy and sent chills down one's spine. Yi Xian suddenly said, "There's something I don't understand." Yi Lingtian's Tendo said, "Ask away." Yi Xian looked at Yi Lingtian. "You hate his father a lot." Yi Lingtian smiled. "I don't hate him that much. I just want to dig up the graves of his ancestors. I want to kill his entire clan while I'm at it." Yi Xian was speechless. Yi Lingtian turned to look at Yi Xian. "What else do you want to know?" Yi Xian thought about it and said, "If you don't mind, tell me about you and him." Yi Lingtian smiled. "There's nothing much to say." Yi Xian suddenly asked, "He abandoned you?" Hearing that, the smile on Yi Lingtian's face suddenly turned ferocious. An invisible murderous intent swept towards Yi Xian, but it quickly disappeared. Yi Xian said, "Did I guess it right?" Yi Lingtian smiled. "No, you guessed wrong." Yi Xian frowned slightly. Yi Lingtian looked at Yi Xian. "I abandoned him." Yi Xian asked in a low voice, "Why?" Yi Lingtian stared at Yi Xian. "Do you think a man should have multiple wives?" Yi Xian's expression froze when he heard that. At that moment, he suddenly understood. Everything was clear. Without a doubt, this woman in front of him was a feminist figure. Yi Lingtian smiled. "Fickle men deserve to die. What do you think?" Yi Xian glanced at Yi Lingtian and said, "Why don't we change the topic?" Yi Lingtian stared at Yi Xian. Her gaze was like a knife that could kill. Yi Xian hurriedly changed the topic. "The matter between you and him shouldn't involve him." Hearing that, Yi Lingtian's body trembled slightly. She retracted her gaze and slowly closed her eyes. Yi Xian said again, "He's innocent, right?" Yi Lingtian was silent for a moment. "The older he gets, the more his appearance and personality resemble him, and that makes me feel more pain," Yi Xian sneered. "So you want to kill him?" Yi Lingtian glanced at Yi Xian. "Why? Are you here to criticize me today?" Yi Xian shook his head. "I'm not interested in your family affairs. Leader Yi, I only know that it's his tragedy that he became your son. Even a vicious tiger won't eat its cubs. What about you? You wanted to kill him countless years ago, and now, you still want to kill him. You motherf asterisk cur." Yi Lingtian said ferociously, "Why don't you blame his father? Did his father care about him? Did he?" Yi Xian was dumbfounded. "My God, his father doesn't care about him, so you're going to be cruel to him? Are you husband and wife comparing who's crueler to your son? Is your family full of perverts?" Yi Lingtian stared at Yi Xian without saying a word. Yi Xian was especially speechless at that moment. God, Yi was just too pitiful to have such a father and mother. At that moment, he truly felt that his father was too good. His father had an extraordinary conscience. Right then, Yi Lingtian said coldly, "What else do you want to ask?" Yi Xian retracted his thoughts and looked at Yi Lingtian. "What's his father's name? What faction is he from?" Yi Lingtian said calmly, "Will I get anything out of it?" Yi Xian's expression darkened. "Are you crazy? You want anything out of it?" Yi Lingtian glanced at Yi Xian. "If there's nothing out of it, why should I tell you?" Yi Xian looked at Yi Lingtian. "Do you think I'm easy to talk to?" Yi Lingtian sneered. "If you want to kill, then do it." Yi Xian chuckled. "Do you think I won't know if you don't tell me?" Yi Lingtian slowly closed his eyes and said no more. Yi Xian said again, "There's one thing I don't understand. Why do you think they'll come after me?" Yi Lingtian glanced at Yi Xian. "Because they're conceited. The more powerful the faction, the more conceited they are. You killed his son." Yi Xian suddenly said, "Stop, stop. What do you mean I killed his son?" Yi Lingtian looked at Yi Xian. "Isn't that the case?" Yi Xian said, "You're the one who killed your son, right?" Yi Lingtian was expressionless. "He reincarnated into you, but now, his main consciousness has disappeared. In the end, you're the biggest winner." Yi Xian was about to speak when Yi Lingtian said, "Don't talk to me about other things. Anyway, his father has already determined that you're the murderer of his son. You can go and explain to him and see if he's willing to reconcile with you. But I believe he won't reconcile with you because in his eyes, you're just someone with a little background. Moreover, you won't reconcile with him because you, Yi Xian, are conceited too. Especially now, you're already in the Ascension realm. Behind you are the two terrifying super forces, Sword Alliance and Skyline Temple. Coupled with that mysterious swordsman, who are you, Yi Xian, afraid of?" Yi Xian looked at Yi Lingtian without saying a word. Yi Lingtian continued, "He targeted you without any investigation. Why is that? Because their family was indeed very, very strong. However, he would never have thought that one of his choices would cause him and his family to be doomed eternally." As she spoke, she slowly closed her eyes. "I can't destroy him and his family, but you, Yi Xian, can." With that, she turned around and left. In her hand, she had been holding the little wooden man. Chapter 17-16. Watching Yi Lingtian leave, Yi Xian did not speak and fell into silence. Beside him, Bai Yi said in a low voice, "Young master, do we kill this person?" Yi Xian looked at Yi Lingtian in the distance and said softly, "Her life is more painful than death. Let's go." With that, he turned and left. Bai Yi glanced at the members of the Yi clan, and then he left as well. In the distance, Yi Lingtian walked to a large hall. Her eyes were a little dazed. Gradually, she began to giggle, then she started to cry. 10,000 years of cultivation, fighting for the top of the great path, all in vain. Invincible? Revenge? There was no longer any meaning to it. She would never come back. The little boy who once said he would protect her forever would never come back. Inside the hall, Yi Lingtian suddenly sat down. She lay on the ground and looked at the little wooden doll in her hand. Tears flowed from her eyes. I'm sorry. 2 hours later. An expert of the Yi clan walked into the hall. He walked to Yi Lingtian's side and whispered, "Clan leader," no response. The expert was taken aback and walked closer to take a look. The next moment, his expression changed and he retreated. At the same time, his face turned pale because Yi Lingtian was no longer breathing. At that moment, all the experts of the Yi clan gathered around. When they saw Yi Lingtian, all the experts of the Yi clan turned pale. Yi Lingtian was gone. The Yi clan was finished. That was the thought of all the Yi clan members at that moment. Without Yi Lingtian, the Yi clan had no ability to survive in the immortal world. At that moment, Yi Tian walked to Yi Lingtian's side and found an envelope in front of Yi Lingtian. Yi Tian picked up the envelope and opened it. Yi Lingtian's voice came from the envelope, "Redress. Redress." Clearly, the Yi clan wanted to redress God Yi. Yi Tian slowly knelt down and the rest of the Yi clan followed suit. In the sky outside the hall, Xiao Tian and Heralian looked away. The two of them looked at each other and sighed softly. Xiao Tian whispered, "This Yi Lingtian is an ambitious person." Heralian nodded. Xiao Tian continued, "Not only did the Yi clan produce Yi Lingtian, but they also produced God Yi. Both of them were able to surpass the Yi clan's ancestors, but because of internal strife." As he spoke, he shook his head. "What a pity! What a pity! Otherwise, the Yi clan would have surpassed the Mok clan in the past." Heralian said softly, "It is indeed a pity, but to us, it is a blessing." Xiao Tian nodded. If this pair of mother and son had always been harmonious, how terrifying would that be? Heralian also sighed softly, "Let the Leaf clan live." Xiao Tian looked at Hilarion, and Hilarion said softly, "Brother Xiao should have thought of killing them all, right?" Xiao Tian nodded, "Yes." Heralion smiled and said, "Let the Leaf clan live." Xiao Tian did not say anything. Wu Jiang laughed and said, "Of course it's a declaration of war. They're already targeting you, young master. Are we still going to reason with them?" Yi Xian nodded slightly and did not say much. He was not someone who liked to cause trouble, but he was not afraid of it either. At that moment, Anlanxiu appeared beside Yi Xian. As soon as Anlanxiu appeared, Zhang Wenxiu and Yi Xian appeared. This time, Yi Xian only brought 2 people, Anlanxiu and Zhang Wenxiu. No, there was also Xiao Ling, and Yi Ling. As for Yi Ling, he was in closed-door cultivation and could not come out for the time being. Anlanxiu looked into the distance and said softly, "Are we there?" Yi Xian smiled. "Not yet." Anlanxiu nodded slightly and looked at Yi Xian. "Is there a new problem?" Yi Xian smiled. "Yes." Anlanxiu asked softly, "Is it very troublesome?" Yi Xian shook his head and looked into the depths of the starry sky. "This time, I'll annihilate anyone who comes looking for trouble with me again." Anlanxiu glanced at Yi Xian. She knew that Yi Xian was really angry. Indeed, let alone Yi Xian, even a clay figurine would be angry. Zhang Wenxiu suddenly asked, "Miss Bai Yi, are there many experts in All Heaven's City?" Bai Yi smiled. "Compared to here, there are many." Zhang Wenxiu smiled. Can you tell us about the major forces in All Heaven City? Bai Yi nodded. All Heaven City has 4 major forces, 6 major clans and 12 sects. The 4 major forces are Sword Alliance, Heavenly Palace, All Heaven's Palace and God Palace. She paused for a moment before continuing. Among the 4 superpowers, the Divine Palace is a little mysterious because they rarely appear. They will only appear when the Qi of Eternal Life appears. Yi Xian frowned. The Qi of Eternal Life? Bai Yi nodded. There is a spring of eternal life in All Heaven City. Of course, it's different from the one in the eternal world. The spring of eternal life in All Heaven City is purer and useful for experts of our level. Yi Xian suddenly asked, is the Qi of eternal life in the eternal world useless to you? Bai Yi smiled. It's useful, but not very useful. The grade of the spring of eternal life there isn't high. Otherwise, the eternal world would have long been flattened. The reason why they exist is that the Qi of eternal life there isn't very useful to the experts of All Heaven City. Moreover, I previously observed that the spring of eternal life there will dry up in 1,000 years at most. Unless they continue to use the spiritual Qi of other worlds to replenish it. But ordinary spiritual Qi is useless and can only be replenished with the Qi of Tao origin. Yi Xian asked again, the spring of eternal life is divided into grades? Bai Yi nodded. From low to high, they are, magic grade, spirit grade, sacred grade and God grade. The eternal world spring of eternal life is the lowest grade, which is magic grade. The All Heaven City spring of eternal life is sacred grade. Yi Xian asked solemnly, are there many spring of eternal life in the universe? Bai Yi shook her head. Few. Very, very few. It can be said that once a new spring of eternal life is discovered, it will cause a storm of blood. When the All Heaven City's spring of eternal life first appeared, at least 100 million people died in the All Heaven City. Among them, there were countless top experts. That year, my Heavenly Palace also lost a total of 6 Heaven Ascension experts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's face suddenly darkened. Are Heaven Ascension experts like cabbages in the All Heaven City? Bai Yi shook her head. Of course not. Even in the All Heaven City, Heaven Ascension experts are super experts. It can be said that in the entire All Heaven City, there are no more than 20 Heaven Ascension experts. Yi Xian's expression relaxed slightly. Fortunately, it wasn't easy for me to reach the Heaven Ascension stage. If your Heaven Ascension experts were cabbages in the All Heaven City, then what's the point of playing with hammers? Bai Yi glanced at Yi Xian with an odd look on his face. It wasn't easy? It wasn't easy for you to reach the Heaven Ascension stage? Damn it! You obviously didn't do anything to reach the Heaven Ascension realm. Thinking of this, Bai Yi smiled bitterly in her heart. They had cultivated for more than 100,000 years to reach the Void Realm, but this young master directly reached the Heaven Ascension stage from the Spirit Destruction stage. Reaching the Heaven Ascension stage in a single bound. She now suspected that the Heaven Ascension stage was specially set up for this young master. At this moment, a sudden change occurred. The space in the distance suddenly exploded. The next moment, a black coffin broke through the void and landed steadily in front of Yi Xian. Coffin delivery. P.S. Is there a part-time job in Giang? I can do that for 5 or 6 hours at night. Please introduce me. Chapter 1717. The sudden turn of events caused the expressions of the swordsman and Bai Yi to change. Bai Yi stood in front of Yi Xian. In the distance, a woman appeared silently. It was the black-robed woman who had appeared earlier. She held a blood-red chain in her hand. The black-robed woman looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Young Master Yi, I'm afraid you won't be able to go to the All Heaven City. Bai Yi's lips curled into a mocking smile. You? As soon as she finished speaking, she transformed into a white lotus and vanished on the spot. In the distance, the black-robed woman opened her palm, and the blood-red chain shot out like a bolt of lightning. Rumble. White light and blood-red light exploded. The two women retreated rapidly. After Bai Yi stopped, she was about to attack again when the black-robed woman suddenly vanished on the spot. Bai Yi frowned slightly. She stomped her right foot lightly, and a white lotus appeared beneath her feet. Rumble. A ray of white light surged from the white lotus and enveloped Bai Yi. At this moment, a blood-red chain silently appeared in front of Bai Yi. Rumble. The white light around Bai Yi cracked, and she retreated by hundreds of meters. But in the next moment, countless white lotuses suddenly appeared around her and exploded. Rumble. The starry sky surged, and a figure retreated rapidly. It was the black-robed woman. After the black-robed woman stopped, she was about to attack again when over a dozen swordsmen appeared around her. The black-robed woman glanced around and sneered, "Are you bullying me with numbers?" As she spoke, she opened her palm, and a black token suddenly shot into the sky. Rumble. A huge black vortex suddenly appeared in the starry sky, and in the next moment, a powerful aura suddenly swept out from the black vortex. Yi Xian was speechless when he saw this. "Damn it! She's calling for people to kill me." Zhang Wenxiu, who stood next to Yi Xian, suddenly said, "Should we attack?" Yi Xian shook his head. Zhang Wenxiu blinked. Pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger? Yi Xian smiled, yes. Actually, if he wanted to kill the black-robed woman now, it was really a piece of cake. But he didn't want to. Because at present, Yi Lingtian definitely did not tell God Ye's father that he had already reached the heaven ascension stage. He didn't even tell the other party about his big brother. As Yi Lingtian had said, this mysterious force was very conceited. He was so conceited that he didn't even bother to investigate him. Therefore, he didn't want to reveal his strength now. Furthermore, there was no need for him to personally take action against this black-robed woman. Zhang Wenxiu approached Yi Xian and smirked. "You're so sinister, but I like it." Yi Xian laughed. At this moment, dozens of people suddenly appeared in the black vortex. These people were all at least Endless World. Seeing this scene, Bai Yi frowned slightly. This force is not simple. In the distance, the black-robed woman sneered. "You want to compete in numbers? You." Suddenly, a sword howl resounded from afar, and then a sword flashed. Before anyone could react, the space between the black-robed woman's eyebrows was pierced by a sword. The black-robed woman was petrified on the spot. Yi Xian turned to look, and in the distant starry sky, a woman slowly walked over. The woman wore a simple linen robe, her long hair draped over her shoulders, and a hemp rope was tied around her waist. It was very simple and plain. The woman took a step and arrived in front of the black-robed woman in the blink of an eye. The black-robed woman stared fixedly at the woman. Peak of the Void Realm. The woman suddenly grabbed the hilt of the sword and stabbed it in. Swoosh! The woman's head split open, and blood splattered. The woman turned to look at Wu Jiang. "What are you waiting for?" Wu Jiang was stunned, and then he hurriedly said, "Kill." As soon as his voice fell, he charged out with the swordsman beside him. The woman sheathed her sword and turned to look at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled. "Senior sword maniac?" The woman nodded. She sized up Yi Xian, and then shook her head. "Realm is not stable." Yi Xian nodded. Although he was now at the heaven ascension stage, this realm was not stable. After all, he did not cultivate it bit by himself. The sword maniac turned to look at Bai Yi. "Where is the woman?" Bai Yi said in a low voice, "The temple master is investigating the person behind this woman." Hearing this, the sword maniac frowned slightly. Investigation? This matter is already so clear, why is there still a need to investigate? Bai Yi glanced at the sword maniac. Senior sword maniac, what do you mean? The sword maniac suddenly turned around and slashed. Hiss. Tens of thousands of meters away, the head of a mysterious expert was chopped off. Seeing this scene, Yi Xian's eyelids twitched. This woman is so strong. This woman's strength is definitely not weaker than Yi Lingtian, and she might even be stronger than Yi Lingtian. The sword maniac suddenly said, "Young master, please wait a moment." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly transformed into a ray of sword light and vanished on the spot. Hiss. 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 In the battlefield, bloody heads flew out incessantly. Seeing the sword maniac attack, the expressions of those mysterious experts changed drastically, and they fled. The sword maniac glanced at those mysterious experts. "Don't let a single one of them go." Wu Jiang nodded, and then he led the swordsman in pursuit. The sword maniac turned around to look at Yi Xian. "You're going to All Heaven City?" Yi Xian nodded. The sword maniac nodded slightly. "That's good. Our forces are there, so we can take care of each other there." Yi Xian was about to speak when a formidable aura suddenly swept over from the depths of the starry sky. The sword maniac turned around, and roaring laughter suddenly resounded from the depths of the starry sky. The Sword Alliance is extraordinarily overbearing. Those who don't know would think that the Sword Alliance is invincible. The sword maniac's face was expressionless as he raised his hand and slashed. "Ohm!" A sword howl resounded, and then a ray of sword light tore through the sky and shot into the depths of the starry sky. Bang! The vast starry sky in the distance exploded apart, and then it vanished bit by bit. The entire starry sky was obliterated. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in that desolate starry sky. It was an old man. The old man wore a large black robe. He had white hair, and his eyes were extremely sharp like an eagle's. The old man was staring fixedly at the sword maniac. The sword maniac pointed his sword at the old man with disdain in his eyes. "You even hid your true identity. How dare you go against my sword alliance?" The old man sneered, "Hide? You think too highly of your sword alliance. As far as the old man is concerned, your sword alliance isn't worthy of knowing who we are." The sword maniac gazed at the old man. "You don't dare to say it?" The old man smiled. "The old man is from the primordial heavenly clan." Bai Yi's face instantly fell when she heard that. The primordial heavenly clan. That's the #1 clan in the primordial heavenly clan. Suddenly, the sword maniac turned to look at Wu Jiang who'd just returned. "Send my order right now. Everyone from my sword alliance is to return to All Heaven City immediately. Besides that, my sword alliance is declaring war on the primordial heavenly clan from this moment onward, and will fight to the death." Fight to the death. The old man's eyes instantly narrowed when he heard that. He was directly declaring war on the primordial heavenly clan. That had exceeded his expectations. Bai Yi glanced at the sword maniac and hesitated to speak. Because she knew about the primordial heavenly clan. She finally understood why God Yi was so outstanding. Apart from God Yi himself, it definitely had a lot to do with the primordial heavenly clan. Of course, the main reason was still God Yi. To be able to reach such a level without the help of the primordial heavenly clan, not to mention in the eternal world, even in All Heaven City and the primordial heavenly clan, he was definitely a top-notch monstrous genius. Unfortunately, such a super monstrous genius had been forced to death twice by his own mother. At that moment, the old man suddenly laughed, declaring war on the primordial heavenly clan? With just your sword alliance? You. Suddenly, the sword maniac vanished on the spot. The old man's pupils constricted, and he took a step forward and threw a punch. There were actually 9 rivers of time in that one punch. However, as the sword slashed down, the 9 rivers of time turned into nothingness in an instant. The old man's expression changed drastically when he saw that, and he suddenly pressed his hands together. In an instant, the time dimension in front of him turned into nothingness. Time turned into nothingness. He intended to eliminate the sword maniac. As for the sword maniac's sword, it instantly turned illusory when it was over 30 m away from the old man. Suddenly, the top of the old man's head split apart, and then countless energy swords slashed down. The old man was shocked. He immediately retracted his hand and retreated. Hiss! 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 Numerous sounds of slicing resounded incessantly. On the other hand, the old man retreated over 10 kilometers away. When he stopped moving, his entire body was covered in scars, and it seemed like he'd been sliced into pieces. The sword maniac glanced coldly at the old man. What kind of trash is this? Are you even worthy of targeting my sword alliance's young master? As soon as she finished speaking, she was about to attack again. However, the old man suddenly spoke ferociously, the sword alliance? Just you wait. Just you wait. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and vanished into the sky. The sword maniac frowned when she saw that. At this time, the experts of the Sword Alliance who had gone out to chase after him had returned. The sword maniac gazed at Yi Xian. Let's go. Yi Xian nodded. Their group continued on their way. On the way, Yi Xian suddenly asked, Miss Sword Maniac, how many members does our Sword Alliance have? The sword maniac thought for a moment and said, a few hundred. Yi Xian spoke solemnly, the weakest is the endless border? The sword maniac nodded, more or less. Yi Xian's face froze. At this moment, he finally understood why Kong Mi had said that he just had to utilize the Swordmaster's token to deal with all his troubles. After all, the dimensional race was trash before the Sword Alliance. Not to mention the Sword Alliance, even the Yi clan wasn't strong enough before the Sword Alliance. Zhang Wenxiu suddenly said, Senior Sword Maniac, is the Swordmaster the strongest expert in the Sword Alliance? The Sword Maniac nodded, yes. Zhang Wenxiu spoke solemnly, if I'm not wrong, then your Swordmaster rarely shows himself, right? The Sword Maniac nodded slightly, he practically never shows himself. With that, she glanced at Yi Xian and said softly, we haven't seen him for a long time. Zhang Wenxiu asked again, so, the ancient divine clan doesn't know the true strength of the Sword Alliance's Swordmaster, right? The Sword Maniac nodded, very few people know. Even we don't know what level the Swordmaster has reached. Zhang Wenxiu said softly, no wonder. At this moment, many powerful auras suddenly appeared in the surroundings. Yi Xian frowned. Wu Jiang suddenly said, young master, these are the people from our Sword Alliance who came to protect you. Yi Xian looked around. After the swordsmen appeared, they didn't show themselves but hid in the surroundings. At this moment, there were at least a few dozen powerful swordsmen. At this moment, the sword maniac suddenly glanced at Bai Yi, young master, there's something wrong with the Skyline Palace. Bai Yi looked at the sword maniac and didn't say anything. Yi Xian asked, what's wrong? The sword maniac said calmly, normally, even if the palace master doesn't come, there should at least be a deputy palace master. But now that you've been attacked, they still haven't come. With that, she glanced at Bai Yi again, young master, be careful. Chapter 17-18. Sword Fanatic was very direct and said it in front of Bai Yi. He didn't give her any face at all. Yi Xian glanced at Bai Yi and smiled. Skyway Hall respects my father. I can understand if they don't respect me. Sword Fanatic shook his head. Swordmaster once said that seeing the token is like seeing him in person. Since the token is in young master's hands, then it's like young master is Swordmaster. Skyway Hall's neglect of young master is the same as neglecting Swordmaster. As she spoke, she looked at Bai Yi. Swordmaster did Skyway Hall a favor all those years ago. However, according to what I know, the current master of Skyway Hall isn't the same as before. So, young master, you should understand what I mean. Yi Xian smiled. Forget it. Of course he understood. How many members of the Sword Alliance had come when he used the Swordmaster's token? How many members of Skyway Hall had come? Including now. Over 200 members of the Sword Alliance had arrived successively. But not a single one from Skyway Hall. Moreover, the Sword Alliance had declared war against the ancient divine clan for him. However, Skyway Hall hadn't said anything. He understood all of this, understood even more. However, he wouldn't make a fuss about it. Because this heavenly flight hall owed his father, not him. It was naturally good if they acknowledged him as their young master, but it didn't matter if they didn't. He knew very well that no matter if it was the Sword Alliance or Skyway Hall, they respected his father. As for Yi Xian, he would never take his father's power for granted. Sword Fanatic nodded slightly when he heard Yi Xian and didn't say anything else. Bai Yi hesitated for a moment and said, "Young master, Skyway Hall is absolutely loyal to young master." Yi Xian smiled. "I didn't think too much about it." Bai Yi sighed softly in her heart. Actually, she was quite puzzled as well. Because she'd notified Skyway Hall, but no one had rushed over. On the other hand, the Sword Alliance had more and more experts. That was very unusual. However, she wasn't a particularly important person in Skyway Hall, so she really didn't know what the higher-ups were thinking. Around 2 hours later, almost 300 swordsmen had gathered around Yi Xian. All of them were at least Endless Realm experts. Needless to say, this was a little terrifying. As for Yi Xian, he felt a little flattered. He had never received such treatment before. He was practically treating him like an emperor. He realized that the swordsmen of the Sword Alliance had a kind of almost perverted worship for his old man. Especially Sword Maniac. He could feel that the Sword Maniac really respected his father. It was for this reason that the swordsmen respected him so much. Father. At the thought of this, Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. His heart was warmed. He had to admit that he was really lucky compared to God Yi. There are many times in life when one should be content with what they have. At this moment, the sword fanatic suddenly stopped. She looked into the depths of the starry sky and frowned slightly. Yi Xian asked, "What's wrong?" Looking at the starry sky in the distance, Sword Addict said indifferently, "It seems that someone doesn't want us to return to the All-Heaven City." Yi Xian looked at the starry sky, and his gaze quickly turned cold. Here it comes again. The ancient celestial clan was here again. At that moment, the Sword Alliance experts surrounded them. Sword auras shrouded the entire starry sky. Everyone was ready for defense. The other party dared to come despite knowing that there were so many experts there. They must have something up their sleeves. Therefore, the Sword Alliance experts dared not be careless. In the distance, an old man suddenly appeared. It was the black-robed man that Sword Maniac had defeated previously. It was an old man. This time, the black-robed old man was not alone. Behind the black-robed old man, there were at least hundreds of them. The black-robed old man looked at Sword Maniac and sneered, "We meet again." Yi Xian suddenly said softly, "Something's not right." Zhang Wenxiu looked at Yi Xian. "What's wrong?" Yi Xian shook his head. "My intuition tells me that it's not that simple." Zhang Wenxiu nodded. "Indeed. The ancient celestial clan was now targeting Yi Xian with all their might. Just because God Yi was gone? Yi Xian felt that it was definitely not as simple as it seemed. Meanwhile, Sword Maniac spoke abruptly, "Young master, you might be overthinking things." Yi Xian looked at Sword Maniac. Sword Maniac looked at the experts in the distance and said, "They're probably targeting you because of their pride." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "Pride?" Sword Maniac nodded. Most top-rate powers care about their pride the most. Especially super top-rate powers. They targeted us in the beginning, so we killed their members and declared war on them. That's a humiliation to them. She looked at Yi Xian as she spoke. "Why did our Sword Alliance declare war on them?" "Because they're targeting you." "It didn't have to come to this." "Because everyone could have sat down and talked it over." Since both sides are similar in strength, it's basically impossible to start a war. However, we didn't give them that chance. Of course, they didn't give us that chance either. Why? Because of their pride. They don't allow others to offend them, and it's the same for our Sword Alliance. So, we can only fight. Yi Xian came to a sudden understanding when he heard this. The reason why the ancient heavenly clan targeted him from the start was because they thought that they were superior to him. They thought that they could crush him and the Sword Alliance. But the Sword Alliance had a temper. "Do you think I'll let you off?" Sword Maniac hadn't just killed members of the ancient divine clan, he'd even declared war on them. So, how could the ancient divine clan tolerate that? Not only did they kill their members, but they even declared war on them? What would the other powers think if they didn't respond? It could be said that it was just as Sword Maniac had said. The reason they'd come to this point was because of their pride. No one would let the other off. Sword Maniac gazed at the black-robed old man who led the group. The old man was about to speak when Sword Maniac suddenly said, "Kill. Leave no one alive. Leave no one alive." As soon as he finished speaking, the swordsmen in the surroundings transformed into rays of light that charged forward. How terrifying was it when a few hundred swordsmen attacked in unison. At the side, Bai Yi glanced at Sword Crazy. Needless to say, the Sword Alliance was really unyielding. Anyone who dares to offend the Sword Alliance must be killed. The ancient divine clan was strong, but the Sword Alliance wouldn't give them any face. Especially when the ancient divine clan was targeting Yi Xian. He was the young master of the Sword Alliance. As for the Heavenly Palace, Bai Yi sighed inwardly when she thought of the Heavenly Palace. Her instincts told her that the Heavenly Palace's actions were definitely not a good thing. In her opinion, if they acknowledged Yi Xian, they would truly acknowledge him just like the Sword Alliance. If they didn't, they wouldn't even need to send anyone over. What's going on now? Sigh. Bai Yi sighed inwardly again. In the distance, a huge battle had begun. The black-robed old man's expression turned ugly. He didn't expect the Sword Alliance to act so decisively. Most importantly, the swordsman's strength was extraordinarily terrifying. At the same level, it would take at least 2 people to deal with a single swordsman. The ancient divine clan was at a disadvantage right from the start. At this moment, the starry sky around them suddenly split open. Following that, a powerful aura suddenly surged out. Seeing this, Sword Maniac frowned. More people are coming. At this moment, a beautiful middle-aged woman suddenly appeared not too far away from Sword Maniac. She looked at Sword Maniac and smiled. "Sword Maniac, do you still remember me?" Sword Maniac glanced at her. "Divine Palace. By Xiao." Yi Xian glanced at the beautiful woman with a trace of surprise in his eyes. The Divine Palace, one of the 4 top forces in All Heaven City, has actually allied with the ancient divine clan? The woman called Bai Xiao laughed. "Sword Maniac, I never expected that your Sword Alliance would declare war on the ancient divine clan. I have to say, my divine palace was overjoyed when I heard this news. Yi Xian looked at Wu Jiang and asked, there's a grudge between the Sword Alliance and the divine palace? Wu Jiang nodded, we've fought a few times. Senior Sword Maniac killed many experts of the divine palace in the past. Yi Xian nodded slightly. I see. In the distance, Sword Maniac glanced at Bai Xiao. In the next moment, she suddenly transformed into a sword light and vanished on the spot. Bai Xiao laughed coldly when she saw Sword Maniac suddenly attack, and then she vanished as well. On the other side, a group of experts from the Divine Palace charged at the members of the Sword Alliance. In an instant, those swordsmen from the Sword Alliance were surrounded. Yi Xian frowned when he witnessed this scene, and he was just about to attack. Meanwhile, a sword howl resounded from afar. Yi Xian looked up. In the depths of the starry sky, a sword light was shooting over like a meteor. It was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, it had reached the star area. Hiss! The head of an expert from the ancient divine clan flew into the air. The ray of sword light descended to the ground, and then a middle-aged man appeared here. The middle-aged man wore a white robe and carried a sword chest on his back. Wu Jiang, who stood by Yi Xian's side, was overjoyed when he saw this person, Senior Sword Ju. Senior. Sword Ju glanced at Yi Xian, and then he turned around and tapped with his fingers. Hiss! The head of an expert from the ancient divine clan was penetrated 3 kilometers away, and his soul was obliterated. Even his consciousness was instantly wiped out. However, this wasn't the end of it. Sword Ju suddenly formed a seal, and then numerous swords shot into the sky from the sword chest on his back. After that, they were like a storm as they slashed down towards the experts of the ancient divine clan and divine palace. The expressions of the experts from the ancient divine clan and divine palace changed drastically when they witnessed this scene, and they retreated explosively. However, it was still slightly too late, and some of them were directly slashed into pieces without being able to fight back at all. At this moment, both sides had split up. Yi Xian glanced at Sword Ju, and he noticed that Sword Ju was at the Heaven Ascension Realm. A Heaven Ascension Realm swordsman. The black-robed old man from the ancient divine clan gazed at Sword Ju with a solemn expression in his eyes. Bai Xiao's eyes were filled with fear as well. She hadn't expected that Sword Ju would suddenly appear here. After all, this man hadn't appeared for hundreds of years. Sword Ju didn't attack again. He turned around to look at Yi Xian, and then he sized up Yi Xian and said, "Have you met the Swordmaster?" Yi Xian replied, "I've met him before, but I don't know where he is now." Sword Ju nodded slightly, and then he gazed at Sword Addict. "Take the Swordmaster back to All Heaven City. Immediately recall all the swordsmen of the Sword Alliance. Anyone who doesn't arrive at All Heaven City within 3 days will be expelled from the Sword Alliance forever. Besides that, immediately declare war on the Divine Palace upon entering the city. Spare no one from the Divine Palace. I'm going to the ancient heaven dimension." As soon as he finished speaking, he transformed into a ray of light that vanished into the depths of the starry sky. Zhang Wenxiu, who stood by Yi Xian's side, spoke softly, declaring war on the slightest disagreement. How unyielding. P.S. If anyone has any suggestions, feel free to leave them in the book review section. Don't mention those who said they'd treat me to a sword. I'm not that kind of person, thank you. Don't insult me. FPZW. Chapter 1719. Tough. Needless to say, Yi Xian felt that the Sword Alliance wasn't just tough. He didn't waste his breath. "If you dare touch me, I'll kill you." He was starting to like the Sword Alliance. As soon as he finished speaking, Sword Extreme vanished into the starry sky. Obviously, he was heading to the ancient heaven plane to fight. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and asked. Will he be in danger? Sword Crazy glanced at the ray of light in the starry sky and said, I'll bury him if he dies. Yi Xian was speechless. Sword Crazy glanced at Bai Xiao and the others in the distance, and then he said, let's return to the All Heavens city first. As soon as he finished speaking, they surrounded Yi Xian and left. Bai Xiao and the others didn't dare to continue chasing after him, because they were afraid that a new expert would appear in the Sword Alliance. They actually didn't know much about the Sword Alliance's overall strength, and they didn't know how many Heaven Ascension Realm swordsmen the Sword Alliance had. Because these swordsmen weren't usually in the Sword Alliance. Meanwhile, the black-robed old man spoke abruptly, I'm returning to the ancient heaven plane. Bai Xiao, ask your palace master to get ready. As soon as he finished speaking, he led the experts of the ancient divine clan away. Bai Xiao glanced into the distance, and then led the experts of the divine palace away as well. Within the spatial passageway, Yi Xian's group of 3 was traveling swiftly through the starry sky. Actually, Yi Xian was the strongest amongst them. However, they didn't want Yi Xian to expose his strength now. Neither the divine palace nor the ancient divine clan had paid attention to Yi Xian. In the beginning, the ancient divine clan had wanted to kill Yi Xian, but their attention had been completely drawn by the Sword Alliance. At the moment, everyone had forgotten about Yi Xian. That was exactly what Yi Xian wanted. He didn't want to expose his strength too early. He wanted to keep a low profile. Keep a low profile and act tough. Around an hour later, a ray of white light appeared in front of Sword Crazy and the others, and then they appeared in front of an enormous ancient city. All Heaven City. Yi Xian looked at the ancient city in front of him. He had to admit that this city was indeed very imposing. The city walls were nearly 300 meters long. Standing in front of the city walls, one could not help but feel small. At this moment, an old man suddenly appeared before everyone. The old man looked at Yi Xian and bowed slightly. Li Xing greets the young master. Yi Xian smiled. Senior, you don't have to be so polite. Li Xing sized up Yi Xian and was shocked. He actually couldn't sense Yi Xian's reality. At this moment, the sword maniac suddenly said, Have you made the arrangements? Li Xing nodded, It has been arranged. Young master, please follow me. Sword maniac nodded and looked at Yi Xian. Let's go. Yi Xian nodded slightly, and the group walked towards the city. At this time, Sword Maniac suddenly looked at Bai Yi and asked, Where are the people from God Palace? Bai Yi's expression immediately turned ugly. Because God Palace didn't send anyone. At this moment, Yi Xian smiled and said, Miss Bai Yi, bring the people from God Palace back first. Also, help me tell the Palace Master that I, Yi Xian, thank her for sending people to Eternal World to help me. Bai Yi hesitated for a moment and nodded, Young Master, I'll return to the palace to report. Take care. Yi Xian nodded, Take care. Bai Yi bowed slightly and left with the people from God Palace. The sword maniac glanced at Bai Yi and the others and said, God Palace has changed. Zhang Wenxiu suddenly asked, Senior Sword Maniac, can you tell me about the relationship between God Palace and your Sword Master? Yi Xian looked at the Sword Maniac as well. He was quite curious as well. The Sword Maniac said, God Palace was almost destroyed all those years ago. It was the Sword Master who saved them, and the current Palace Master promised the Sword Master that she would forever serve the Sword Master. Zhang Wenxiu frowned slightly, Forever serve? The Sword Maniac nodded, That's what they said. Zhang Wenxiu said softly, And now, the Palace Master is no longer the Palace Master of the past. Am I right? The Sword Maniac nodded. Zhang Wenxiu looked at the Sword Maniac, Senior Sword Maniac, then why are you still willing to serve the Swordmaster? The Sword Maniac said softly, the Swordmaster is our faith. Faith. Zhang Wenxiu glanced at the Sword Maniac and was somewhat shocked. These Sword Alliance swordsmen regarded the man in green as their faith. Yi Xian was also quite shocked. It was obvious that his father's prestige in these people's hearts was not ordinary. These people respected his father from the bottom of their hearts. The Sword Maniac suddenly looked at Yi Xian. What's your attitude towards God Palace? Yi Xian said with a smile, let them be. They respect my father. If they don't respect him now, that's between them and my father. I don't have the right to force them to recognize me. Including Sword Alliance. It's fine if you don't want to recognize me. The Sword Maniac looked at Yi Xian. You have a good attitude, but I have to correct one thing. Sword Alliance is what it is today because of your father. Sword Alliance belongs to him. Without him, there wouldn't be us. So, since he gave the Swordmaster token to you, we will recognize you. Whoever touches you, we will kill them, even if we have to become enemies with the entire universe. Yi Xian was speechless. Zhang Wenxiu suddenly asked, Miss Sword Maniac, besides Sword Alliance and Sky Palace, does Senior Green Shirt have any other forces? The Sword Maniac nodded, yes. Zhang Wenxiu was stunned, then quickly asked, what forces? The Sword Maniac said softly, I know of two. One is God Temple, a group of ascetic monks who travel the heavens and rarely meet. The other is Spectre Palace. They are more mysterious than God Temple because they are not human. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Spectre Palace? The Sword Maniac nodded, I met one of them in the past. He is not human, he is very strange and mysterious. They don't seem to be friendly to humans because I can feel their hostility. Zhang Wenxiu suddenly asked, can you contact them? The Sword Maniac shook his head, I can't, only the Swordmaster knows. Then, she looked at Yi Xian, if you use the Swordmaster token again in All Heaven City, you might be able to contact them. Because the everlasting world is too far away, some experts who are further away won't be able to sense you if you use the Swordmaster token. Zhang Wenxiu smiled, in other words, if he uses the Swordmaster token here, he can summon more experts? The Sword Maniac nodded, but I don't recommend young master to use the Swordmaster token again. Zhang Wenxiu was confused, why? The Sword Maniac glanced at Yi Xian, young master, do you want to use the Swordmaster token again? Yi Xian shook his head. Just when the Sword Maniac was about to speak, Yi Xian suddenly said, those forces respect Dad. It's not good if I use the Swordmaster token to order them. Of course, I'll use it again if necessary. The Sword Maniac nodded slightly and did not say anything. Yi Xian glanced at the Sword Maniac, Senior Sword Maniac, does Dad have any other forces apart from the Spirit Palace and the Celestial Temple? The Sword Maniac said, Milky Way sect. But it's very far away from us. Other than that, there are other forces, but I don't know the specifics. As she spoke, she paused for a moment and said, the Swordmaster is ahead of us, and he's gone much further than us. We don't know where he's gone at all, nor do we know what sort of level he's attained. I'm unfamiliar with him as well. As the Sword Maniac said, the Sword Alliance was also unfamiliar with the green-robed man. Because the green-robed man rarely came to the Sword Alliance. The main reason why the Sword Alliance respected the green-robed man as a god was that the Sword Dao cultivation method of the Sword Alliance was left behind by the green-robed man. Moreover, there was a strand of Sword Dao intent left behind by the green-robed man. This strand of Sword Dao intent was the cultivation direction of the Sword Alliance's swordsmen. As they spoke, they'd entered the city. The streets were desolate, and there wasn't a single person. However, there were many extremely obscure auras in the surroundings. Yi Xian glanced at the surroundings and said, what's the attitude of the All-Heaven Mansion? Li Xing said, we don't know what their attitude is right now. However, the Swordmaster is the vice city governor of the All-Heaven Mansion, so they probably won't side with the ancient divine clan and the divine palace. Yi Xian shook his head, that might not be the case. Li Xing gazed at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian spoke softly, even though Dad left some good karma all those years ago, he hasn't come to these places for many years, so those good karma might not bear fruit. All of you better be on guard. Because the ancient divine clan was able to make the divine palace side with them so quickly, so they definitely offered some tempting conditions. Li Xing nodded, understood. The sword fanatic agreed, young master is right. We must be on guard against the All-Heaven Mansion, so that we don't get caught off guard. Yi Xian suddenly said, are we going to return to the Sword Alliance now? Li Xing nodded, yes. Yi Xian looked into the distance, are the members of the Sword Alliance attacking the Divine Palace now? Li Xing nodded, our members are killing the experts of the Divine Palace. However, there's no need for you to worry about it. Young master, return to the Sword Alliance first. There's a sword formation there, so it'll be safer. However, Yi Xian shook his head, let's go straight to the Divine Palace. Li Xing looked at Yi Xian with astonishment. Yi Xian added, let's go straight to the Divine Palace. Li Xing hesitated for a moment, and then he looked at the sword fanatic. The sword fanatic looked at Yi Xian, the situation isn't clear yet. We don't know if there are any other powers besides the ancient divine clan and the divine palace. So, it's safest for you to return to the Sword Alliance. Yi Xian smiled, I know what you're worried about, but I have an idea. The sword fanatic said, go ahead. Yi Xian said seriously, the divine palace has sided with the ancient divine clan. We're sure about this. As for the other forces, such as the All-Heavens Palace and even the Heavenly Palace, including the 6 great families, these forces must be watching from the sidelines. They haven't chosen a side yet. If we were to quickly destroy the God Palace at this time, then we would be able to make these wavering forces feel apprehensive. We might even be able to get rid of their thoughts of becoming enemies with us. Most importantly, I think this is the best time for us to destroy the Divine Palace. Because the Divine Palace didn't expect us to be so decisive. Li Xing said in a deep voice, I'm afraid it'll be difficult to destroy the Divine Palace quickly. Yi Xian smiled, that's not the point. The point is that we have the intention to destroy them, and we're still doing it. We want the world to know that we'll destroy anyone who dares to touch us. As he spoke, he looked at the sword fanatic, pass down my order, all Sword Alliance swordsmen are to head to the Divine Palace immediately, and kill any Divine Palace experts on sight. Also, pass down my order, from now on, we will fight the Divine Palace to the death. Either they die, or the Sword Alliance dies. Everyone. FPZW. Chapter 1720. Fight to the death. Needless to say, Li Xing and the others were shocked. Declaring war and fighting to the death were two different things. Fighting to the death meant that there was no room for reconciliation. It was a true bloody battle between the two sides. Fight to the death. Li Xing hesitated for a moment and looked at the sword addict. Sword addict was expressionless. From now on, everyone in Sword Alliance will listen to young master's orders, including me. Whatever he says, you don't have to look at me, understand? Li Xing was stunned for a moment before he quickly said, got it. As he spoke, he opened his palm, and a sword light suddenly soared into the sky. In the next moment, numerous rays of light shot into the sky, and then they shot towards the palace. Yi Xian said, let's go to Divine Palace. Sword Maniac nodded. I'll lead the way. With that, she took off on her sword. Yi Xian and the others also flew up on their swords and headed straight for the Divine Palace. Fight to the death. When the Sword Alliance announced that they would fight to the death with the Divine Palace, all the forces in the All-Heaven City were dumbfounded. The Sword Alliance used to have some conflicts with the Divine Palace, but they were just small frictions. There was no real life-and-death struggle. But at this moment, the Sword Alliance directly announced that they would fight to the death with the Divine Palace. Needless to say, this shocked everyone. Whether it was the Sword Alliance or the Divine Palace, they were both top forces. If these top forces were to fight to the death, it would mean that both sides would perish. Heavenly Hall. Bai Yi stood in the main hall. Not far away from her sat a woman. The woman wore a long black dress and had long hair that draped over her shoulders. There was a hint of heroic spirit between her brows. Xiao Yu, the current Skywalk Hall Master. At this moment, Xiao Yu suddenly looked up at Bai Yi. What do you think of the young master? Bai Yi hesitated for a moment before he said, May I know which aspect you're referring to? Xiao Yu said, all of them. Bai Yi shook her head, our contact is too short, I can't tell. Xiao Yu chuckled. You may leave. Bai Yi nodded slightly and retreated. She didn't say anything because she wasn't qualified. After Bai Yi left, an old woman suddenly appeared in the hall. The old lady looked at Xiao Yu and said, Palace Master, logically speaking, Palace Master should personally welcome the young master. Xiao Yu suddenly stood up. She walked to the entrance of the main hall and looked towards the horizon. She smiled and said, Mother Lin, I'll go and welcome the young master. I'll bring him to the Heavenly Path Palace, and then we'll serve him. Mother Lin said in a low voice, in the past, the Palace Master said to the Swordmaster that the Heavenly Palace would forever serve the Swordmaster. The smile on Xiao Yu's face gradually disappeared. But he is not that Swordmaster. Mother Lin looked at Xiao Yu, he has the Swordmaster token. Seeing the token means seeing the Swordmaster. Moreover, he has the Swordmaster's bloodline. Xiao Yu turned to look at Mother Lin. Mother Lin, it hasn't been easy for the Heavenly Path Hall to develop to this point. Not only am I unwilling to submit to others, but many of the elders within the hall are also unwilling. Mother Lin sighed in a low voice, Girl, do you want to break the contract? Xiao Yu smiled and said, Yes. Very direct. Mother Lin sighed again, Girl, the reason why the Palace Master submitted to the green-robed Sword Master was not so simple. Moreover, the green-robed Sword Master has given our Heavenly Path Hall a debt of gratitude. Xiao Yu said, I sent people to save his son, this is already a debt of gratitude. Mother Lin looked at Xiao Yu, not saying anything. Xiao Yu said again, Mother Lin, the Heavenly Path Hall's development to this point, its current scale, is all because of the efforts of our Heavenly Path Hall's countless ancestors, it was not given to us by others. Moreover, there is no one in the hall who is willing to submit to a 20-something-year-old brat. Mother Lin sighed again, Girl, that green-robed Sword Master is not an ordinary person. Moreover, it was us who promised him that we would respect him as our master. Now, someone has activated the Sword Master token, but we do not respect it. This is a violation of the promise made by our ancestors. Xiao Yu looked at Mother Lin, our ancestors are our ancestors, we are us. Mother Lin slightly shook her head, Girl, let me ask you, is the current Heavenly Path Hall stronger, or the Heavenly Path Hall of the past? Xiao Yu was silent. Because the Heavenly Path Hall of the past was strong. In the past, the Heavenly Path Hall had more than 10 Heaven Ascension experts. Moreover, the current Hall Master was a Heaven Ascension expert. But now, there were only 4 Heaven Ascension experts in the Heavenly Path Hall. At this time, Mother Lin spoke again, Girl, in the past, our Heavenly Path Hall was so powerful, but we still chose to submit to that green-robed Sword Master. Sai, you are now the Hall Master of the Heavenly Path Hall. Everything in the Heavenly Path Hall is up to you. You decide for yourself. Finished speaking, she turned and left. At this time, Xiao Yu suddenly said, "Does Mother Lin know that the ancient Heaven Realm's ancient divine clan has already declared war on the Sword Union? And their goal is to kill this young master." Mother Lin's footsteps stopped. She looked at Xiao Yu, and Xiao Yu continued, "The God Palace has already joined their camp." Mother Lin's eyes narrowed, "You also want to join?" The corner of Xiao Yu's mouth curled up. She opened her palm and a scroll floated towards Mother Lin. "This is the condition they gave." Mother Lin opened it and in the next moment, her pupils suddenly shrank. If the God Palace was willing to help the ancient divine clan, they would immediately obtain a spring of eternal life. Moreover, it was a spirit spring of eternal life. One must know that in the entire All-Heaven City, there was only one spring of eternal life in the holy world. Moreover, this saint spring of eternal life was shared by everyone. Spirit spring of eternal life. Mother Li was silent. She knew what Dao Yi's spirit spring of eternal life meant. It meant that the heavenly palace could cultivate more super experts. Not only that, but they could also recruit other top-level rogue cultivators. A spirit spring of eternal life was enough to raise the heavenly palace's overall strength to a new height. Mother Li looked at Xiao Yu, "You're tempted?" Xiao Yu nodded, "Yes." Mother Li stared at Xiao Yu, "You've also decided?" Xiao Yu nodded again. Hearing this, Mother Li shook her head slightly, "Girl, do you know what you're doing?" Xiao Yu smiled slightly, "Mammy Li, of course I know. My actions are equivalent to turning the good karma of the ancestors into a bad karma. Not only that, it's also very risky. It could cause our heavenly palace to be consigned to eternal damnation. After all, the strength of that green-robed Swordmaster is a mystery. No one knows how strong he is." Mother Li said in a low voice, "But you still decided to take the risk." Xiao Yu nodded, "I have to take the risk. Because the Shen Palace has decided to ally with the ancient divine clan. Not only the Shen Palace, but they also contacted the All Heavens Palace. If we don't participate, in the next 100 years, our Shen Palace will be left behind by them. Moreover, this time, the ancient divine clan is not only plotting against Yi Xian." Mother Li shook her head, "I'm not interested in what they're plotting. Girl, I just want to tell you that any decision you make could cause our heavenly palace to be consigned to eternal damnation. Also, let me give you a suggestion. Although I know you won't listen, I still have to say it. That is, you don't have to recognize him as your master. You don't have to help him, but don't join forces with others to deal with him. That's all I have to say. Think about it yourself." Saying this, she turned and left the hall. Inside the hall, Xiao Yu shook her head and smiled, "Stubborn old man." Saying this, she looked at the sky outside the hall and said softly, "A promise has trapped our heavenly palace for countless years. I don't know what the sect master was thinking." City Lord Mansion. A young man walked through the garden and arrived at a small courtyard behind the City Lord Mansion. In the courtyard, an old man wearing linen sleeves was lying on a stool, slowly rocking back and forth. The old man held a small teapot in his right hand. The young man walked to the old man's side and bowed slightly. "Grandfather." The old man didn't open his eyes. He took a sip from the teapot and said, "Have you met the young master?" The young man shook his head. "Not yet." The old man nodded slightly and didn't say anything else. The young man hesitated for a moment and said, "Grandfather, the ancient divine clan has offered generous conditions. So long as our sect master and the others keep the Sword Alliance busy, we'll be able to obtain 2 eternal spring water." The old man nodded and said calmly, "What do you think?" The young man fell silent. The old man glanced at the young man. "Are you tempted?" The young man nodded. The old man looked at the young man. "Since you're tempted, then do it." The young man was stunned. The old man continued drinking his tea. The young man hesitated for a long time and said, "I don't think it's that simple. Moreover, according to my knowledge, the green-clothed Swordmaster is the Vice City Lord of our All-Heaven City." The old man sighed softly, and then he placed the teapot aside and said, "Little fellow, grandfather is very pleased because you haven't been blinded by benefits. If you agreed to the ancient divine clan's request, then grandfather wouldn't just cripple you, he would even expel you from our Lin clan." The young man was shocked, and he hurriedly walked over to the old man's back and massaged the old man's back. "Please guide me, grandfather." The old man looked up into the sky and spoke softly, "I was fortunate enough to meet the green-clothed Swordmaster once when I was your age. Do you know what your great-grandfather's attitude towards him was like?" The young man shook his head. The old man spoke softly, "Your great-grandfather was so humble when he faced him. You can't imagine it. I've never seen him be so humble towards anyone. Moreover, do you know how that green-clothed Swordmaster became the Vice City Lord?" As he spoke, a trace of complicated emotions flashed through his eyes. "Your great-grandfather knelt on the ground and begged him to be the Vice City Lord." The young man was petrified when he heard that. The old man continued, "Even so, he wasn't willing to be the Vice City Lord. In the end, your great-grandfather begged him bitterly, and he was only willing to be the Vice City Lord in name. At that time, he had a request. He hoped that if anyone with the Swordmaster's token came here in the future, he would help them. Do you know how your great-grandfather replied?" The young man shook his head. The old man spoke softly, "Your great-grandfather replied that if anyone with the Swordmaster's token came here, the All-Heaven Mansion would repay him with death." "Repay with death?" The young man did not speak. The old man continued, "Your great-grandfather had already reached the Heaven Ascension stage." The young man's pupils constricted when he heard that. The old man slowly closed his eyes. "After so many years, I thought that the Swordmaster's token would never appear again. I never expected that it would appear now. Not only has it appeared, but it's also the green-clothed Swordmaster's son." As he spoke, he suddenly finished the tea in the teapot and said, "Here's our chance. Pass down my order. Get all the experts of the All-Heaven Mansion to return immediately. If they don't return within a day, they will be expelled from the All-Heaven Mansion forever. Also, get all the elders who are in seclusion out of seclusion. Also, immediately inform the ancient heavenly clan that the All-Heaven Mansion is willing to help them." The young man was stunned when he heard that. "Grandfather." The old man rolled his eyes at the young man. "Stupid. We'll agree to help them first. When they think that we're going to help them, we'll suddenly stab them in the back. Isn't that great?" The young man was speechless. FPZW. Chapter 1721. The Divine Palace. The Divine Palace was located at the north of the All-Heaven City, and the entire north was its territory. On this day, countless swordsmen suddenly surged into the north, and then they killed every single Divine Palace expert they saw. The sudden attack of all the Sword Alliance swordsmen caught the Divine Palace by surprise. Because they hadn't expected the Sword Alliance to be so resolute that they wouldn't stop until one side was dead. In front of a gigantic palace, countless powerful beings were engaged in a fierce battle around the palace. Although the Divine Palace had many experts, they were obviously inferior to the Sword Alliance in terms of quality. At least 2 experts were needed to suppress a single Sword Alliance expert. Therefore, the Divine Palace was at a disadvantage as soon as they fought. In the Divine Palace. At this moment, a middle-aged man stood in the palace, and he was the current palace master of the Divine Palace, Li Daoran. Bai Xiao stood behind Li Daoran. Both of their faces were slightly gloomy. Especially Li Daoran. He hadn't expected that the Sword Alliance would attack the Divine Palace in full force, and it caught him by surprise. After all, the Divine Palace still had some experts that hadn't returned from the outside world. After a short while, Li Daoran suddenly said, "Did the ancient heavenly world reply?" Bai Xiao spoke in a low voice, "They've sent experts over, and they'll be here in an hour at most." An hour? Li Daoran's face fell. If the experts from the ancient heavenly clan took an hour to arrive, then the Divine Palace would definitely lose a lot of experts in that hour. Because it seemed like the Divine Palace was much weaker than the Sword Alliance. They didn't lack in numbers, but their combat strength was too inferior. Meanwhile, the space before Bai Xiao trembled slightly, and then she was overjoyed. "Palace Master, the ancient heavenly clan sent a letter saying that the All Heavens Palace has agreed to help." The All Heavens Palace? Li Daoran suddenly turned to look at Bai Xiao. "Really?" Bai Xiao nodded, "Absolutely. Moreover, the Heavenly Palace has agreed to help as well." Li Daoran instantly heaved a sigh of relief, and then he turned to look outside the palace and chuckled, "The Sword Alliance is gone." Outside the Divine Palace, Yi Xian and the others had arrived. At this moment, the Sword Alliance's experts had completely suppressed the Divine Palace's experts. It was a crushing defeat. Yi Xian looked at the magnificent Divine Palace in the distance. At this moment, the Divine Palace was surrounded by a great formation, and these great formations blocked the Sword Alliance's experts. The sword-crazy fellow who stood by Yi Xian's side glanced at the grand formations and said, "We won't be able to break through them in a short period of time." Yi Xian suddenly asked, "Is there any movement from the All-Heaven Palace?" At this time, Li Xing appeared beside Yi Xian and said in a solemn voice, "Our people sent a letter saying that the All-Heaven Mansion is gathering experts." Upon hearing that, the sword maniac next to Yi Xian frowned. Li Xing added, "It's not just the All-Heaven Palace. The Heavenly Air Hall is also gathering experts." Yi Xian looked at Li Xing. "Skyline Hall?" Li Xing nodded. "We also received news that the ancient divine race promised them a spiritual grade spring of eternal life. The All-Heaven Mansion must have received the same promise." Yi Xian said softly, "They're actually able to provide so many spiritual grade spring of eternal life. They're not simple." Li Xing nodded, "They're indeed not simple. Although it isn't a sacred grade spring of eternal life, it's still extremely precious." Yi Xian said, "In other words, we might be besieged?" Li Xing nodded, "Yes." Suddenly, numerous powerful auras appeared in the distant sky. Li Xing glanced at the sky and said, "Those are the experts of the Heavenly Air Hall." Li Xing's voice rang out. As soon as he descended, a woman appeared in the sky. Li Xing said, "The current Hall Master of the Heavenly Air Hall, Xiao Yu." In the sky, Xiao Yu looked at Yi Xian and said with a smile, "Mr. Yi." Yi Xian smiled, "Is the Heavenly Air Hall going to help the ancient divine race?" Xiao Yu gazed at Yi Xian. "I heard that young Master Yi killed the young master of the ancient divine race, God Yi. I think that young Master Ye's actions are truly—" Yi Xian suddenly waved his hand. "Hall Master Qiao, Yi Xian, hate people who want to be whores and maintain a chastity at the same time. If you want to fight, then let's fight. Please don't do that to me. It disgusts me." Xiao Yu smiled, "Then let's fight." As soon as she finished speaking, a few hundred people suddenly appeared in the sky. The weakest amongst them was the Endless Realm. There were many void rank experts amongst them as well, and there were at least 30 of them. They could be said to have turned out in full force. The reason Xiao Yu dared to act in this way was because she'd received news that the All-Heaven Mansion had agreed to participate in the battle. She'd been quite worried in the beginning, but she didn't have any more ancient books once the All-Heaven Mansion agreed to participate in the battle. Even though the Sword Alliance was strong, could it be stronger than the joint forces of the All-Heaven Mansion, Heavenly Air Hall, and Divine Palace? Moreover, there was the formidable ancient heaven world. How could the Sword Alliance win? Meanwhile, the grand formations of the Divine Palace suddenly dispersed, and then all the experts of the Divine Palace charged out. For a time, the forces of the Divine Palace and Skypath Hall crushed the Sword Alliance in terms of numbers. However, none of the experts of the Sword Alliance feared them. All the swordsmen stood with their swords in hand, and their eyes were filled with boundless battle intent. Xiao Yu turned around and glanced in the direction of the All-Heaven Mansion, and then she frowned slightly. Why hasn't the All-Heaven Mansion made a move? Meanwhile, the sword fanatic suddenly said, "Kill! Kill!" As soon as he finished speaking, countless experts of the Sword Alliance charged forward. They were outnumbered, but they attacked first. In terms of imposing aura, they crushed the Skypath Hall and Divine Palace. Xiao Yu gazed at Li Daoran. Why haven't the experts of the ancient divine race arrived yet? Could it be that they want us to wear each other down? Li Daoran turned around to look at Bai Xiao, and she spoke solemnly. I just received news that their reinforcements were forcefully stopped by a few Heaven Ascension realm experts of the Sword Alliance. Stopped. Li Daoran and Xiao Yu's faces sank when they heard this. Xiao Yu spoke coldly. Does the ancient divine race not have any Heaven Ascension realm experts? At this moment, an old man suddenly appeared in front of them. It was an expert of the ancient divine race. The old man cupped his fists and said, Hall Master Qiao, Palace Master Li, my ancient divine race has dispatched Heaven Ascension realm experts to deal with the swordsmen. Our people will arrive here in at most half an hour. Xiao Yu gazed at the old man. Are you sure? The old man nodded. The old man guarantees that he will arrive here in half an hour at most. Moreover, the All-Heaven City has agreed to help us. Li Daoran frowned slightly. Then why haven't they made a move? The old man smiled. City Governor Lin Xiu said that they will attack at the critical moment and give the Sword Alliance a fatal blow. Xiao Yu's face instantly turned cold. How could she not understand what the All-Heaven City meant? They wanted them to fight to the death with the Sword Alliance first, and then the All-Heaven City would come and take advantage. What a scheme! Xiao Yu suddenly felt slightly regretful. She regretted showing herself so early. She should have waited a little longer. Meanwhile, the old man from the ancient divine race spoke abruptly, let's join forces to stop the Sword Alliance's swordsmen. Both of them looked into the distance. Because even though they had crushed the Sword Alliance in terms of numbers, they weren't gaining any advantage. On the contrary, they were gradually falling into a disadvantageous position. The swordsman's combat strength was truly too terrifying. The old man suddenly looked at Yi Xian. Capture him. The Sword Alliance is fighting so desperately because of him. Once we capture him, we can subdue the Sword Alliance. Xiao Yu looked at Yi Xian. All right. I'll stop that sword fanatic and leave him to the two of you. Li Daoran nodded. Attack. As soon as he spoke, the three of them vanished on the spot. Xiao Yu went straight for the sword fanatic, whereas the old man and Li Daoran went straight for Yi Xian. The sword fanatic frowned slightly when he saw the three of them rushing towards Yi Xian. Protect the young master. As soon as she finished speaking, she charged towards Xiao Yu. At this moment, the ancient divine clan powerhouse and Li Daoran had already arrived in front of Yi Xian. A ray of sword light suddenly shot out from Yi Xian's side, slashing towards Li Daoran. Li Daoran's expression changed, and he slammed his fist forward. Rumble. The ray of sword light shattered, and Li Daoran had returned to his original position. A swordsman stood in front of him. A Heaven Ascension stage swordsman. At this moment, the old man from the ancient divine clan was already in front of Yi Xian. He glared at Yi Xian and sneered, Die. Yi Xian clenched his right fist and was about to attack. However, a shadow suddenly appeared in front of him, and then a ray of sword light tore through the sky. Bang! The old man hadn't even reacted when he was slashed 3 kilometers away, and his body was instantly obliterated as soon as he stopped moving. The old man was dumbfounded. He looked in front of Yi Xian, and saw an old man standing in front of Yi Xian. The old man had a head of white hair, and he held a wooden sword in his hand. Was his body slashed by the wooden sword just now? It's Jianmu. Li Daren's voice rang out in the old man's mind. This person is a Heaven Ascension stage swordsman, and he is extremely powerful. You must not underestimate him. Heaven Ascension stage. After Jianmu pushed the old man back, he turned to look at Yi Xian. He sized up Yi Xian, and then bowed slightly. This old man Jianmu greets the young master. Yi Xian hurriedly bowed. Senior, there's no need to be so polite. Jianmu suddenly turned his head. Bring a chair for the young master. As soon as he spoke, a swordsman immediately brought a chair over. Jianmu looked at Yi Xian. Young master, you can sit. Yi Xian, Jianmu smiled. Today, with my sword alliance here, no one can hurt the young master. Not to mention the ancient divine clan, even if the entire ancient heaven realm comes together, they won't be able to. As he spoke, he suddenly turned around, and the sword light disappeared into the horizon. Chi! In the distance, the head of the ancient divine clan old man flew into the air. Blood splattered. Instant kill. Below, Yi Xian really sat down. He actually wanted to make a move, but he was also waiting for the best opportunity. Now that no one knew his strength, it was the best time for him to play dirty. At this moment, the distant horizon suddenly split open, and the next moment, 5 powerful auras swept over. 5 Heaven Ascension stage experts. The ancient divine clan experts had arrived. In the sky, Jianmu looked at the 5 Heaven Ascension stage experts, and slowly closed his eyes. I believe in the Swordmaster, I am invincible. As his voice fell, he directly rushed over with his wooden sword. 1 against 5. Yi Xian. FPZW. Chapter 1722. Yi Xian didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he heard Jianmu. Needless to say, the experts of the Sword Alliance worshipped his father so much that they almost went mad. He was slightly curious about the strand of sword intent his father left behind in the Sword Alliance was. I have to go back and take a look. Even though Jianmu was powerful, he naturally couldn't fight 5 Heaven Ascension Realm experts by himself. He was suppressed by the 5 Heaven Ascension Realm experts as soon as the battle began. Jianmu didn't fight them head-on, and he returned to stand before Yi Xian. As soon as he returned to stand before Yi Xian, the 5 Heaven Ascension Realm experts surrounded him. Jianmu's eyes narrowed slightly. He held the wooden sword in his right hand while profound energy surged within him, and a powerful sword aura swept out from within him. He naturally couldn't retreat any longer. Because Yi Xian was right behind him. Just when Jianmu was about to attack, a few hundred powerful auras suddenly appeared in the sky. Everyone turned to look at the source of the sound. It was an old man in the lead. The All-Heaven Mansion. The old man was the previous city governor of the All-Heaven Mansion, Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao roared with laughter as soon as he appeared. The old man is here. Xiao Yu and Li Daoran were overjoyed when they heard this. Li Daoran flew over to Lin Xiao and cupped his fists. He was just about to speak when Lin Xiao slapped him. It was so swift that Li Daoran wasn't even able to react before he was slapped. Slap. A resounding slap resounded, and then Li Daoran was blasted flying. As he flew, his body started to crack bit by bit. At this moment, everyone was stunned. Suddenly, Lin Xiao said, "Attack." As soon as he finished speaking, the experts of the All-Heaven Mansion charged towards the surroundings. Their target wasn't the Sword Alliance, but the Heavenly Palace and Divine Palace. This sudden turn of events caused the Heavenly Path Hall and the Divine Palace to be stupefied. The ancient Divine Clan's reinforcements were stunned as well. Suddenly, Li Daoran, who only had his soul left, roared furiously, "Activate the formation! Everyone, retreat into the formation!" As soon as he finished speaking, a pillar of light shot into the sky from the Divine Palace, and then it transformed into a barrier of light that enveloped the entire Divine Palace. After the Divine Palace experts received the order, they quickly returned to the Divine Palace. The Heavenly Movement Hall's powerhouses also flooded towards that Divine Palace one after another. But they were still a little slow. Close to 100 over endless border powerhouses were directly killed. Earlier, when the All-Heaven Mansion attacked, the Sword Alliance's experts didn't stay idle either. Under the pincer attack from both sides, more than 100 people died on the spot. Among these 100-plus people, there were people from the Heavenly Movement Hall and people from the God Palace. The 5 Heaven Ascension experts from the ancient Divine Clan were also stopped by the 3 Heaven Ascension experts from the All-Heaven Mansion and Jianmu. In an instant, the situation of the battle had been turned around. In the distant Great Array, Li Daoran glared at Lin Xiao. "Old dog Lin Xiao, you actually betrayed us." Lin Xiao ignored Lin Xiao and walked to Yi Xian with the group of All-Heaven City members. He immediately bowed respectfully to Yi Xian. "Greetings, young master." Behind Lin Xiao, the powerhouses bowed and said in unison, "Greetings, young master." The expressions of Li Daoran and the others instantly became extremely unsightly when they witnessed this scene. Yi Xian hurriedly stood up to help Lin Xiao up, and he smiled, "Senior Lin Xiao, there's no need to be so polite. I can't accept it." Lin Xiao smiled, "Young master, I'm slightly late. Please don't take it to heart." Yi Xian smiled, "I think it's just right." Lin Xiao roared with laughter, "Thank you for your understanding, young master." Yi Xian said, "To tell you the truth, I came to All-Heaven City this time because I wanted to pay a visit to the All-Heaven Mansion. Because my father instructed me to pay a visit to the All-Heaven Mansion when I'm free and ask the seniors there to guide me." The green-clothed Swordmaster. Lin Xiao's expression became solemn. "Young master, where is the Swordmaster now?" Yi Xian smiled, "Father is wandering around blindly." "Wandering around blindly." Lin Xiao sighed softly, and then he said, "To tell you the truth, I really want to meet the Swordmaster and obtain guidance from him." "Unfortunately." Yi Xian suddenly smiled, "What's so unfortunate about that?" "He'll come." Lin Xiao gazed at Yi Xian. Yi Xian grinned, "I'm here." Lin Xiao was stunned, and then he patted his father on the shoulder, "Alas, I've gone senile. Since you're here, then the Swordmaster will definitely come here." Yi Xian blinked, "Senior Lin Xiao, why don't we deal with the Divine Palace and Skypath Hall first?" Lin Xiao spoke seriously, "Of course." As soon as he spoke, he clapped his hands, "Activate the formation." As soon as he finished speaking, a few dozen mysterious experts appeared in the sky above the Divine Palace. All of them held ancient books in their left hand and a spear in their right. As soon as they appeared, they started to swiftly chant incantations, and the white barrier of light above the Divine Palace gradually started to tremble violently before cracks started to appear on it. The expressions of Li Daoran and the others grew even more unsightly when they witnessed this scene. "Why?" At this time, a Heaven Ascension expert from the ancient Divine Clan looked at Lin Xiao, "City Lord Lin Xiao, is 2 spirit-level eternal life springs not enough?" Lin Xiao looked at the Heaven Ascension expert and smiled, "What nonsense are you talking about? Let me tell you, my All-Heaven Palace is willing to forever be loyal to the Swordmaster. Not to mention 2 spirit-level eternal life springs, even if it's 2 divine-level eternal life springs, my All-Heaven Palace will not betray the Swordmaster." The Heaven Ascension expert glared at Lin Xiao, "City Lord Lin Xiao, your actions are very unwise. You will pay for your actions today. Lin Xiao immediately raised his middle finger and laughed, I'm your mother's chrysanthemum. Quickly come and kill me. The crowd was somewhat dumbfounded. This old man was a heaven ascension expert, why was he cursing? And cursing in such a nasty way, Yi Xian was also somewhat dumbfounded. This old man did not have the demeanor of an expert at all. In the distance, the face of the heaven ascension expert who was cursed suddenly turned ugly. Lin Xiao, you're a heaven ascension expert, how dare you say such vulgar words, you. As he spoke, he seemed to be unable to contain his anger and directly charged at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao laughed and charged forward as well. With that charge, the entire world became illusory. Soon, the two directly entered the river of time to fight. In the distance, Yi Xian just watched the battle between the two. At that moment, he was a little shocked. Although he was also in the Heaven Ascension realm, he found that in terms of combat power, he was still some distance away from these veteran Heaven Ascension experts. Not to mention him, even God Yi from back then was a distance away from these veteran Heaven Ascension experts. Because he was God Yi, except for God Ye's consciousness, he had everything God Yi had. In fact, if God Yi was given more time, no more than 10 years at most, no one in the Heaven Ascension realm would be a match for God Yi. Because he found that God Yi was about to surpass the Heaven Ascension realm. Unfortunately, there was too little time. He was a true Heaven's favored one. Unfortunately, he met two people that he should not have met in his life. One was Yi Lingtian. If Yi Lingtian did not treat him that way back then, the current God Yi might have far surpassed the Heaven Ascension realm. And the second person was Qing Er. God Yi chose to die in the end, part of the reason was because of Qing Er. Because the moment his consciousness awakened, Qing Er was already prepared to kill. He had no choice but to die. He had no other choice. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. He suddenly realized that he, Yi Xian, was actually not outstanding. In terms of talent, he could not compare to An Lanxiu, let alone God Yi. At that moment, Xiao Ta suddenly said, "Young lord, don't be so emotional. I think there's something about you that others can't compare to." Yi Xian's face was full of black lines. "Xiao Ta, how do you know what I'm thinking?" Xiao Ta chuckled. "I guessed." Yi Xian was speechless. Xiao Ta continued, "I think you have a very, very strong point, young lord. In this world, there are not many people who can compare to you." Yi Xian was a little curious. "What good point?" Xiao Ta said, "Thick skin. The thickness of your skin has already surpassed that of your previous master." Yi Xian's expression froze. Xiao Ta continued, "A person who is shameless is invincible." "Young lord." At that moment, Yi Xian suddenly spread out his hands and Xiao Ta appeared in his hands. Yi Xian threw him directly into the sky. "I don't want it anymore." Whoosh! Xiao Ta turned into a golden light and disappeared into the horizon. Everyone was speechless. At that moment, Xiao Ta flew back to Yi Xian. Xiao Ta swayed for a while. "Young lord, you're too heartless." Yi Xian said indifferently, "Xiao Ta, I'll sell you another day." Xiao Ta was speechless. Yi Xian no longer fooled around with Xiao Ta. After he put away Xiao Ta, he looked at the river of time in the distance. At that moment, Lin Xiao and the Heaven Ascension expert were still fighting. Yi Xian turned to look at the divine palace in the distance. Under the joint attack of the experts of the heavenly palace, countless cracks had appeared on the huge light curtain. Yi Xian suddenly pointed to a place, "Everyone attack together, break this point." Hearing Yi Xian's words, all the swordsmen on the battlefield suddenly drew out their swords. Hundreds of sword lights streaked across the sky, directly slashing at the place Yi Xian pointed to. Boom! In an instant, the huge light curtain was directly shattered. Once the formation was broken, the expressions of the Divine Palace experts under the Great Formation suddenly changed. Yi Xian looked at the experts from the God Palace and Heavenly Air Palace. Kill. Leave no one alive. Leave no one alive. Hearing Yi Xian's words, all the experts on the battlefield directly rushed towards the Divine Palace. The battle began. Yi Xian looked at Sword Maniac. Are all the experts of the Sword Union here? Sword Maniac shook her head. 2 people have not arrived yet. They are both Heaven Ascension experts, and they are on their way. Yi Xian nodded slightly, then asked again, what about Senior Sword Ju? Sword Maniac said in a deep voice, he blocked 3 Heaven Ascension experts of the ancient Divine Clan. Yi Xian asked, is there any danger? Sword Maniac shook her head, no. Yi Xian looked into the distance, then eat the people here first. Sword Maniac nodded slightly. She was about to speak when the space in front of her suddenly trembled. A moment later, Sword Maniac's face sank slightly. Yi Xian looked at Sword Maniac, what's wrong? Sword Maniac looked into the depths of the distant starry sky. In the distant starry sky, a middle-aged man suddenly appeared. On the middle-aged man's left chest, there were 2 small words, Ancient. Ancient Divine Clan. As soon as the middle-aged man appeared, more than 100 people appeared behind him, and among them, there were more than 10 Heaven Ascension experts. The middle-aged man looked at Yi Xian and the others in the distance and smiled, didn't your Sword Union want to fight to the death? Come, my ancient divine clan will play with you. Whoever is a coward is a grandson. As he spoke, he waved his right hand, kill. As soon as his voice fell, the people behind him directly rushed towards Yi Xian and the others. Seeing the experts rushing over, Sword Maniac's eyes flashed with a trace of malevolence. She opened her palm, and a sword appeared in her hand. Just as she was about to attack, she suddenly turned her head to the right, and her eyes were filled with solemnity. In the depths of the starry sky on the right, the distant starry sky suddenly boiled. Powerful auras constantly attacked from that starry sky. Another group of experts appeared. Could they also be from the ancient divine clan? At this moment, an angry roar suddenly came from the depths of the starry sky. Who dares to touch the young master? Chapter 1723. Who dared to touch the young master? As soon as these words were spoken, everyone was shocked. Especially the experts from the ancient divine clan who had just appeared. The middle-aged man in the lead turned around and frowned. A trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. More experts had arrived? Yi Xian and the others were also looking at the starry sky. They were also curious. Who was it? An old man suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian and the others. The old man wore a loose cloud-colored robe and held an ancient book in his right hand. He had a faint smile on his face and looked very refined. Behind the old man were more than 100 people. The weakest among them was the Endless Border. There were even 5 Heaven Ascension experts. The Yen family. The middle-aged man from the ancient divine clan glared at the old man. You are Yen Jinqing of the Yen family. The old man ignored the middle-aged man and walked in front of Yi Xian. He bowed slightly to Yi Xian. Yen Jinqing of the Yen family greets the young master. The others behind the old man also bowed. The Yen family. Yi Xian hurriedly helped the old man up. Old senior, please don't be so polite. The old man sized up Yi Xian and stroked his beard with a smile. Young master, you're not simple. Yi Xian smiled and looked at the sword maniac. Introduce him. The sword maniac shook his head. I don't know him. He didn't know him. Yi Xian was stunned. This sword maniac didn't know about the Yen family? Yen Jinqing suddenly smiled. Young master, we come from the Confucian world, which is quite far from the All-Heaven City. As for my Yen family, we rarely come out into the world. Hence, very few people know of our Yen family. Yi Xian said in a low voice, the Confucian world? Yen Jinqing nodded. Yes. I'll give you a detailed introduction later. Yi Xian smiled. Okay. At the moment, Yi Xian was still a little shocked. Not until then did he realize that his father had really gone far away from him. Not only his father, but also Qing'er. If it weren't for him, who knows where they would be now. He had slowed down the two of them. At this moment, the middle-aged man from the ancient divine clan suddenly said, "Does the Yen family intend to interfere in this matter as well?" Yen Jinqing turned to look at the middle-aged man and said with a smile, "My Yen family will follow you to death." Young master. Hearing this, the middle-aged man glanced at Yi Xian, and he was slightly puzzled. Where did this guy come from? And that green-robed sword master? Who were these father and son? Why were so many forces so loyal to him? At this moment, the middle-aged man's expression turned solemn. He felt that the ancient divine race might have underestimated the green-robed sword master. At this moment, Sword Maniac suddenly vanished on the spot. Attack directly. Her target was the middle-aged man. Cross-rank challenge. Yen Jinqing was taken aback by the sword addict's direct attack. The Sword Alliance was too unyielding. Don't you want to talk anymore? The middle-aged man suddenly said, "Retreat." As he spoke, he looked at Li Daoran and Xiao Yu from the Divine Palace. Both of you retreat first. The 5 of us will stop them. He didn't choose to flee with his men because if he did that, the forces of the Divine Palace and Skypath Hall might be annihilated. Even if they weren't completely annihilated, they would definitely suffer heavy losses. Moreover, if he did that, those 2 forces might directly turn to Yi Xian. Therefore, the 5 of them had to stay behind to cover their retreat. When they heard the middle-aged man's words, Li Daoran and Xiao Yu's faces turned extremely unsightly. Leaving was equivalent to giving up all the benefits of the All-Heaven City, including the spring of eternal life. However, they had no choice but to leave. If they didn't leave, then without the help of the ancient divine clan, their forces would be completely devoured. They didn't think too much about it and immediately retreated with their respective experts. The members of the Sword Alliance naturally wouldn't allow Xiao Yu and the others to leave so easily, and all the swordsmen charged forward. Meanwhile, the 5 Heaven Ascension stage experts from the ancient divine clan suddenly vanished on the spot. Boom! In an instant, countless time rivers appeared in the sky. These world rivers were like barriers that blocked the sky and blocked the Sword Alliance's sword cultivators. And it was this obstruction that allowed the experts of the Skypath Hall and Divine Palace to retreat. The 5 Heaven Ascension stage experts also immediately retreated. Just as Sword Maniac was about to give chase, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Let's not chase for now." Sword Maniac looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled and said, "Let's slow down first." Sword Maniac hesitated for a moment, then nodded slightly. The Sword Alliance indeed needed to slow down now. Yi Xian looked at Yen Jinqing and Lin Xiao, who was walking over, and cupped his fists. "Thank you for your help, seniors." Lin Xiao was somewhat dissatisfied. "Young master, you're too polite. I wasn't joking when I said that the All Heavens Palace will forever be loyal to you. The All Heavens Palace will always respect the Swordmaster and Young Master. Young Master, if you need anything, just let us know." Yen Jinqing glanced at Lin Xiao, then hurriedly said, "Young Master, the Yen family is also willing to be loyal to you. The Yen family is willing to climb a mountain of swords and dive into a sea of flames for Young Master." Yi Xian, Lin Xiao glanced at Yen Jinqing, somewhat displeased. Someone even tried to suck up to him. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Seniors, please take a rest first. The ancient divine clan will not give up. So, to us, this is just the beginning. Lin Xiao nodded. We have to come up with a countermeasure. He naturally did not dare to underestimate the ancient divine clan. From the looks of it, the overall strength of this force was definitely above the All Heavens Palace. Moreover, the Skypath Hall and Divine Palace had joined them. Yi Xian suddenly looked at Sword Maniac. Return to the Sword Alliance. He wanted to see the Sword Principle will that his father had left behind. As if he'd thought of something, Yi Xian suddenly gazed at the Divine Palace in the distance and said, Miss Sword Maniac, clean up the battlefield. And take away the Skypath Hall as well. Everyone. A short while later, Yi Xian arrived at the Sword Alliance under Sword Maniac's lead. Sword Maniac led Yi Xian to a large hall. The hall was very large and very quiet. Sword Maniac suddenly stopped. There was a strand of Sword Principle wool on a nearby wall. It was left behind by the green-clothed man. Sword Maniac bowed deeply when he saw this strand of Sword Principle wool, and his eyes were filled with devotion. Sword Principle faith. The Sword Alliance really treated the green-clothed man as their faith. Yi Xian walked over to the strand of Sword Principle wool. At this moment, the strand of Sword Principle wool trembled slightly. Obviously, it had sensed Yi Xian's presence. Yi Xian sized up the strand of Sword Principle wool. He gradually realized that this strand of Sword Principle wool wasn't simple at all. It was a complete strand of Sword Principle wool. Moreover, Chen Shi had left it behind on purpose. It was completely different from the incomplete Sword Principle wool he'd seen in the past. Now, he truly understood why the Sword Alliance treated Chen Shi as a form of faith. Because this strand of Sword Principle wool that Chen Shi's father had left behind was a Sword Principle wool. It was a Sword Principle and a direction. Any swordsman wouldn't be confused after they saw this strand of Sword Principle wool, and they would have a direction. So the Sword Principle could be like this. At this moment, Yi Xian had such a feeling as well. So the Sword Principle wool could be so awesome. This strand of Sword Principle will contain too much. Even at this moment, a strand of admiration towards Chen Shi had arisen in his heart. Needless to say, Chen Shi's father was quite capable. Meanwhile, Xiao Ta suddenly said, Young master, have you been underestimating master all this time? Yi Xian's face fell. Damn it. How did you know what I was thinking? Xiao Ta chuckled. I guessed. Yi Xian, Xiao Ta suddenly said, Young master, let me tell you, master is at his strongest when he goes crazy. However, master is basically invincible now. He rarely goes crazy. You haven't seen him go crazy before. When he goes crazy, he even slashes himself. Yi Xian said softly, Father didn't have it easy in the past, right? Xiao Ta said, compared to you, master really didn't have it easy. Sometimes, he was really miserable.